There have been thousands of great professional wrestlers throughout the industry's long, illustrious, and varied history. A great thing about pro wrestling is its diversity, with performers coming in every shape and size from hotbeds like the United States and Canada, Japan, Mexico, the United Kingdom, and beyond. There are bruising brawlers and high flyers, crisp technicians and flamboyant showmen, and they all have a place in this wacky and wonderful sport. Attempting to determine the very cream of the crop is, in many ways, a foolish and futile endeavor. So leave it up to a bunch of fools to give it a go, eh? Yes, the inevitable has happened, and we've tried to see who exactly the very best wrestlers in the history of the profession are. There's no set criteria because obviously this is all incredibly subjective, but we've tried to consider a combination of in-ring skill, box office drawing ability, cultural impact, longevity, historical importance, and wider influence on the business. It's also important to note that we've tried to contextualize the wrestlers profiled here within their time period. Which brings us to the fact that some historic figures, as significant as they may have been, may end up missing the cut due to a lack of video footage or other sources that we can draw from besides handed down tales and stats. This is a list that also, rightly or wrongly, favors the individual accomplishments of the performers. In saying that, we are not including whole tag teams or stables in entries, though obviously many of those that did make the cut will have ties to one or both. Again, there is no set formula here, of course, but we have done our best to argue the reasons why certain people made it on the list. We will be giving some attention to any noteworthy outside-the-ring antics that warrant mention, but performers are being graded on what they've produced in the business, not their reputation outside of it. Whether they're down towards the tail end or in the top 10, to even be in consideration is to say that everyone on this list is uniquely brilliant in their own way. And hey, even if you don't take issue with our ranking, and you almost definitely will, hopefully this countdown will still, at the very least, expose you to someone you've perhaps never even heard of before. Hey, they might just end up becoming your all-time favorites. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are the 101 greatest pro wrestlers ever. Join us. Number 101, Paul White. Young, athletic, and standing at around 7 feet tall, Paul White was always going to get an opportunity to be an attraction in the world of professional wrestling. With just one independent match to his name and limited training, White, as the Giant, made his WCW debut by defeating Hulk Hogan for the World Heavyweight title in the main event of the 1995 Halloween Havoc pay-per-view. It was an auspicious start for the big man, and though his career would have many peaks and troughs after, White continued to remain a star, especially with his run in the early NWO. His ring and character work greatly improved over time, especially when thrust into the limelight in WWE as the Big Show. The world's largest athlete added the WWE, ECW, and WWE World Heavyweight titles to his impressive list of accolades, as well as a bunch of other prizes like the Intercontinental, United States, Hardcore, and Tag Team titles. He has been saddled with some horrific creative during his career, and his frequent heel and face turns became a bit of a running gag. But on his day, White was a fantastic talent, and it's no surprise WWE trusted him to carry the ball in high-profile situations, such as his money-spinning WrestleMania encounter with Floyd Money Mayweather. Number 100, Jay Briscoe. One of the best wrestlers to never sign full-time with a major promotion, Jay Briscoe, along with his brother Mark, was at the forefront of the explosion of indie talent that came along in the early 2000s. Making his debut at the age of just 16, Jay and his younger sibling gained attention wrestling for various independent promotions before making their home in Ring of Honor. Appearing on the promotion's very first show, Jay would wrestle for the company every year for the next 2 decades, save for 1 year, 2005, when Mark was injured and he didn't want to compete without him. Fans who attended Ring of Honor or other independent shows featuring the Briscoes were treated to some of the most cutting-edge tag team action on the planet. As well as his amazing tag career, Jay, who could brawl, high fly, mat wrestle, and do whatever else the occasion called for, also had a solid singles career and held the Ring of Honor World title twice. Tragically taken from us at the age of just 38 in January of 2023, Jay's life was cut short while he was still in his prime, but his legacy lives on. Number 99, Arn Anderson. One of the best to never hold a world title, Marty Lundy grew to be appreciated as one of the profession's best in-ring technicians and one of the best tag team wrestlers of all time. Lundy's aesthetic and stylistic similarity to Ole Anderson got him a gig as Ole's kayfabe nephew and a run as a member of the Minnesota Wrecking Crew, which is when AA really began to demonstrate his skill on the mat. As a member of the Four Horsemen, he also showed that he could play the role of the group's enforcer to perfection and wasn't too shabby when it came to cutting a promo either. Whether teaming with Ole, Ric Flair, Barry Windham, Tully Blanchard, Larry Zbyszko, Bobby Eaton, hell, even Paul Roma, Arn was the ultimate professional and turned cutting the ring in half and isolating an opponent prior to the babyface's inevitable comeback into an art form. A believable fast-bumping heel with a top 5 DDT and spinebuster, Anderson became a multi-time tag team champion in the NWA/WCW and WWE and showed his chops across 4 runs with the WCW World Television title. Injuries forced his retirement in 1997, after which he became one of the most valued minds backstage as an agent/producer. Number 98, the Dynamite Kid. Tom Billington got his start in the United Kingdom, debuting in 1975 and winning the British lightweight and welterweight titles during the early years in his homeland. Dynamite's big break would come when he began working for the legendary Stu Hart-ran territory Stampede Wrestling, where he had great matches with Stu's son Brett and impressed everyone with his cutting-edge athleticism. Advanced as they were, those bouts paled in comparison to his series of classics opposite the original Tiger Mask, Satoru Sayama for New Japan in the early 1980s. American fans got a decent taste of Dynamite Kid thanks to his run in the tag title winning British Bulldogs team in WWE, which he formed with cousin Davey Boy Smith. As troubled outside of the ring as he was talented in it, Dynamite was often mired in scandal, and his injuries left him having to use a wheelchair and suffering from various health issues after retiring in 1996. He passed away on his 60th birthday, December 5th, 2018, and is routinely cited by Brett, Steve Austin, and countless others as one of the best ever bell-to-bell. Number 97, Ron Simmons. For fans who identify Ron Simmons as the tough guy in blue jeans who beat up barflies alongside partner Bradshaw, they really ought to take a look at Big Ron's pre-WWE career. Because while Simmons certainly did strike a chord and get over big during his APA days, he made history while on WCW's books. Ron became the first African-American performer to win a major wrestling world title when he beat Vader to win the WCW Championship on August 2nd, 1992. Though he was only a legitimate main eventer for a relatively short stretch, the former NFL player also had a great run in the tag team Doom with Butch Reed. Far from a finesse guy, Simmons was a dynamic powerhouse who blazed a trail for future generations. Made a WWE Hall of Famer in 2012, the 3-time WWE Tag Team Champion was really good at the grab game. In fact, I'd go as far as to say he was damn good at it. Number 96, Jeff Jarrett. Love him or most likely hate him, there is no denying Jeff Jarrett's track record or staying power when it comes to the professional wrestling business. The third-generation star got his start in Memphis, working for his father Jerry Jarrett's Continental Wrestling promotion before exploring other territories on his way to WWE. Double J spent the 90s flitting back and forth between the Fed and WCW, establishing himself as a solid upper mid-carder and bagging tag team, United States, European, and Intercontinental gold, holding the latter two at the same time in 1999. In the dying days of WCW, Jarrett became a main eventer and world heavyweight champion. Then, after WCW kicked the bucket, Jeff and Jerry founded NWA TNA. While many will roll their eyes at his frequent and often lengthy NWA title reigns, the truth is that JEFF-JARRETT had a vested interest in making sure the company succeeded, and he was genuinely one of the only credible choices to carry the belt, especially in the promotion's early days. In the years since, Jarrett has shown himself to be one of the industry's true survivors, landing landing high-profile gigs with various promotions, including WWE and AEW, both on-screen and behind the scenes. He's also the only wrestler to have ever been a member of the Four Horsemen, NWO, and Bullet Club. Ain't he great? Number 95, Seth Rollins. One of the most remarkable things about Seth Rollins is how good he was at such a relatively young age. Within just a few years of his debut and still in his early 20s, the Architect was headlining Ring of Honor as the promotion's world champion, no small feat when you consider their roster at the time. As Tyler Black, he became one of the independent scene's top talents, drawing the attention of a WWE who were becoming more open to the idea of recruiting from the supposed minor leagues. Rechristened Seth Rollins, his time in WWE developmental was not without its challenges, but Rollins rose above and in the process became the first ever NXT champion. Called up to the main roster alongside fellow hopefuls Dean Ambrose and Roman Reigns, Rollins turned heads as the workhorse of the Shield. Not to say his partners were slacking, of course, but Seth knew how to put a proper shift in, and once the Shield's first run was over, broke out onto his own. He was the first Hound of Justice to win a WWE World title, famously cashing in during the main event of WrestleMania 31. Since then, Rollins has been an invaluable utility player. He's always had really good matches, but his promo and character work has reached another level in recent years, and the great thing about Seth is that you know he will adapt to any situation he's put in and produce a high standard of work regardless of whether he's jerking the curtain or closing the show. Number 94, Kevin Nash. Well, this countdown was always going to be controversial, and I'm sure seeing Kevin Nash, especially straight after Seth Rollins, is going to send some of your brains, if not your keyboards, into meltdown. With his height, physique, and athletic ability, he played basketball professionally in Europe, Nash always had an advantage above others in the business. However, his earlier days saw him saddled with lame duck gimmick after lame duck gimmick. Master Blaster Steel, Oz, and Vinny Vegas hardly scream WrestleMania headliner now, do they? Despite all that WCW-sanctioned nonsense, Big Sexy caught the eye of Shawn Michaels and jumped ship to become the Heartbreak Kid's on-screen bodyguard Diesel in WWE. Emerging from Shawn's shadow to become a genuine main event star, Big Daddy Cool captured the world title by shockingly beating Bob Backlund in just 8 seconds at a Madison Square Garden house show. Diesel would hold the title for a year and then jump back to WCW in 1996, where he helped change the business. Post-WCW, he's enjoyed spells back in WWE as well as TNA and then WWE again. Nash always treated the business as a business and followed the money above everything else, but as a founding member of the New World Order and for playing his part in more great matches than you probably think, his place in the top 101 is warranted. See you in the comment section. Number 93, Davey Boy Smith. One of the greatest and most famous British wrestlers of all time, Davey Boy Smith is widely regarded as one of the best in the business to have never won a world title. It's not that the talent or marketability wasn't there, of course, more that the British Bulldog was viewed as a utility figure who could be plugged into the main event as easily as he could the mid-card, and became something of a tag team specialist while teaming with the likes of Dynamite Kid, Owen Hart, and Lex Luger. Making his name in Stampede, Davey Boy followed Dynamite Kid to Japan and then WWE, the duo capturing tag team prizes everywhere they went. After they split up, Smith became a star in his own right, and at the height of his popularity, won the Intercontinental title in the main event of SummerSlam 1992, besting brother-in-law Bret Hart in a classic while 80-odd thousand of his countrymen cheered him on inside Wembley Stadium. Bulldog never quite reached those heights again, but the powerhouse continued to have a tremendous career and had many excellent bouts with Owen, Bret, and Shawn Michaels amongst others, becoming the inaugural WWE European Champion before injuries derailed him. Tragically passing away in 2002 at the age of just 39, the WWE Hall of Famer's popularity has arguably yet to be matched by anyone from Blighty. Number 92, Trish Stratus. Trish Stratus is a true sports entertainment success story. A fan of the business growing up, Stratus transitioned from fitness modeling to professional wrestling and signed with WWE while the Attitude Era was in full swing. Initially positioned as a manager and paraded in front of the camera as a piece of eye candy, Trish worked hard to earn the respect of her peers and fans by becoming a full-on wrestler. The multi-time women's champion came to rule the division within just a few short years, working as both a babyface and heel and having some tremendous matches, especially for the diminished standards of the time, while also being involved in some of the most memorable storylines of the day. Confident on the microphone and improving with every performance in the ring, Trish's transformation was heartening to watch, and she did much, along with her contemporaries Lita, Molly Holly, Victoria, Jacqueline, Jazz and company, to rehabilitate the image of women's wrestling in WWE. By the time she bowed out in 2006, her legacy was already assured. Subsequent returns, such as her SummerSlam 2019 outing with Charlotte Flair and 2023 feud with Becky Lynch, have demonstrated that Stratus could no doubt hang in any era. Number 91, Booker T. Like pretty much most of our professional wrestling heroes, Booker T these days is regrettably the object of slight ridicule for his outspoken opinions and being the man to utter phrases like, "Oh, shucky ducky quack quack" on commentary. But make no mistake about it, Booker T was a very, very good professional wrestler. One of the best 101 to ever do it, actually, when you really examine his career. Turning his life around following a stint in the Slammer, Booker and his older brother Stevie Ray became one of the best tag teams of the 1990s, winning a boatload of titles in WCW. The younger sibling was always the standout, however, and received the opportunity to fly solo once Harlem Heat had run its course. As a singles wrestler, Booker went from strength to strength and became a five-time WCW heavyweight champion. Swimming as some of his fellow invaders sank, Booker became a big star in WWE from the off. Ever threatening to axe kick his way through the glass ceiling, the man from Houston, Texas finally did just that when he bagged the World Heavyweight title as King Booker in 2006. Comedy, serious, babyface, heel, tag team, singles, Booker could do it all and is one of the best all-rounders of the past 30 or so years. And I hope you can dig that, sucker! Number 90, Atsushi Onita. Despite failing to initially meet the requirements of All Japan Pro Wrestling's dojo since he hadn't graduated high school, Atsushi Onita was accepted into the training facility anyway, thanks to Giant Baba. The first decade of Onita's career followed a familiar pattern as he did the requisite learning excursions and acted as a ringside young boy, then gradually worked his way onto the main cards and became a staple of All Japan's junior heavyweight division during the early to mid-80s. Forced to retire in 1985 due to injuries, Onita ended up coming back with a vengeance years later, forming the Renegade FMW promotion. Inspired by his American mentor Terry Funk, Onita helped popularize deathmatch wrestling in his homeland, his own popularity soaring due to his willingness to test the pain boundary and his undeniably cool character. Decked out in a leather jacket and smoking a cigarette to the pulsating strains of Wild Thing, deathmatch specialist Atsushi Onita may well have been one of the coolest wrestlers on the planet at one point in time. He was also a major draw in his day, helping his FMW promotion become a force in the Japanese wrestling landscape by selling out arenas and occasionally stadiums across the country. He wasn't a typical headliner by any means, but his uniqueness was clearly appealing to fans who flocked to see him in all manner of dangerous matches. Like Funk, Onita retired more times than he had hot dinners over the years, and the boundary-pushing bouts he favored were not without their critics, but in a landscape dominated by New Japan and All Japan, Onita managed to have a distinguished career that continues to acutely inspire masochists like Jon Moxley. Number 89, Pedro Morales. Pedro Morales was the pride of Puerto Rico. An amateur grappler in high school who also flirted with a career playing baseball, Morales elected instead to get into the professional wrestling business and made his debut at the age of 17. Morales never stayed in one place for too long during the first 20 years of his career, where he made a name for himself throughout the world as a consummate babyface who possessed great speed and abundant charisma. He was able to connect especially well with the Latino audience, and his fan base was a rabid one, matching Pedro's passion in the ring. His peak was in the early 1970s when he beat Ivan Koloff to win the WWF title, the first Latino to do so. He had a tough act to follow since Bruno Sammartino had held the championship for almost 4 years before the Russian Bear's transitional reign, but he did so admirably and defended it with pride for 1,027 days. He returned to WWF in the early 80s, becoming the promotion's first Triple Crown champion when he bagged the tag and intercontinental titles. The first man to win the IC title twice, for a long time he held the record for most days as champion at a recognized 617 days across 2 reigns. Towards Towards the tail end of his in-ring career, Morales was a solid hand and then worked as a road agent and announcer after retirement. Made a member of the WWE Hall of Fame in 1995, he all but disappeared from the business once his days at the commentary desk were over. A 28-year veteran of the ring wars, Pedro Morales passed away in February of 2019, aged 76. Number 88, Will Ospreay. Will Ospreay may divide opinion with both his habit for thinking before he tweets and the fast-paced, high-flying style he has literally taken to new heights, but there is no doubting the super smooth Englishman has revolutionized the business. Debuting on April Fool's Day in 2012, Ospreay worked his way up the UK indie ladder, gaining notice for his otherworldly acrobatics. Word quickly travelled about the aerial assassin's exploits on British shores, and he began to receive offers to perform on bigger platforms, including PWG and TNA. On the recommendation of both AJ Styles and Kazuchika Okada, Will was invited to tour with New Japan Pro Wrestling. It's safe to say that he impressed the right people, first ruling the junior heavyweight division and then making the step up to heavyweight, becoming the first ever British IWGP World Heavyweight Champion. Working for New Japan, Ospreay has noticeably improved just about every facet of his act over the last 6 or 7 years. He's bulked his body up and perhaps toned down some of the flips and twists and crazy bumps, which is good news for his longevity and future health, but the quality of his matches has remained the same. A 5-star bout machine, Ospreay is the man for the big occasion and has had countless epics with a variety of different opponents across multiple organizations. Veterans may tut and shake their head at the full throttle pace he insists on going at, but his list of titles, accolades, and endorsements speak for themselves. Now just getting started as a member of the AEW roster, the sky well and truly is the limit for the still young Ospreay. Number 87, Perro Aguayo. With a forehead that would make New Jack blush, it should come as no surprise that Lucha Libre legend Perro Aguayo tended to bleed a lot. A vicious heel known for brawling and throwing his body around with reckless abandon, Aguayo the Dog was a big star in the 1970s and 80s, winning titles not just in his native Mexico, but around the world. These included the NWA middleweight title and the WWF light heavyweight title, even if WWE doesn't recognize the belt's pre-1997 history. Because he was such a big draw at the time, Aguayo was allowed to work for rival companies EMLL and the UWA at the same time. He wasn't a gifted flyer, opting instead to make his matches come across like realistic fights while shedding plenty of plasma and scrapping around the arena. Aguayo had a famous program with an aging El Santo in the mid-70s, which really put him on the map and established him as a major draw south of the border. His feuds often culminated in famous hair versus mask or hair matches, with Aguayo typically coming out on the losing end. But a shaved head was a small price to pay for the sort of business that Aguayo was able to do, and even though he was primarily a villain, his performances earned the admiration of the fans, and he became a beloved hero in his later years when all the hard bumping had slowed him down. The man who drew so much money, had such legendary rivalries, and popularized moves like the double foot stomp passed away in July of 2019, aged 73. Number 86, Aja Kong. While women's wrestling in America was on the downswing in the 90s, with all due respect to Alundra Blaze, Luna Vachon and the like, over in Japan it was booming, with various promotions doing great business thanks to a new generation of female performers who were collectively raising the bar to the loftiest of heights. Chief among them was Aja Kong, who was a major star for All Japan Women's Wrestling. Almost like the big Van Vader of the women's division, Kong first intimidated with her look, which included bleach blonde hair and war paint. Once you got past that, she would knock you about with vicious strikes and punish you with grueling submissions, while she herself was very hard to wear down. Kong won everything there was to win in All Japan Women, and even headlined the historic first Big Egg Wrestling Universe show in 1994, the 10-hour all-female extravaganza held before 40,000 fans in the Tokyo Dome. A year later, Western fans got a taste of what the Royal Queen was all about when she turned up in WWF and, for a time there, looked to turn the company's women's division around. The 90s and early 2000s were Kong's prime years, but she's continued to wrestle for various organizations to this day, inspiring a generation of women who perhaps don't fit into the pretty little box that some promoters wish they would. Her matches, especially those with Bull Nakano, stand up to this day, and you will struggle to find a more believable wrestler, male or female. Truly a timeless monster heel. Number 85, Rob Van Dam. Few wrestlers have had an influence influence on the modern style as much as Rob Van Dam. That is, to varying degrees, both a positive and negative consequence of the whole effing show's innovation. A disciple of the legendary Original Sheik, Van Dam cut his teeth on the indies and overseas in Japan before finding a home in Extreme Championship Wrestling. Even in those outlandish surroundings, RVD stood out as one of the promotion's best and certainly most memorable talents thanks to his cool and cocky attitude, cutting-edge ring style, and artful singlets. Although he was ECW World Television Champion for almost 2 years, Van Dam never won the company's big one, at least not while working for Paul Heyman's original incarnation. The peak of a stellar WWE career, which saw him bag hardcore, tag team, and intercontinental gold, was his WWE title victory over John Cena at the second ECW One Night Stand pay-per-view, after which he was awarded the relaunched ECW title as well. A nonconformist by nature, the whole effing show never bowed to political pressures and did things on his own terms, voluntarily leaving WWE to explore his options and winding up wrestling internationally and for TNA. An inductee into the WWE Hall of Fame, whenever Van Dam wrestles these days, he shows his enviable agelessness by performing to a high standard even as he approaches his mid-50s. Number 84, Scott Steiner. The greatest mathematician in wrestling history, Scott Steiner's full-time career had two very distinct halves. The first was spent teaming with Brother Rick in WCW, New Japan, WWF, and ECW. Together, the Steiner brothers are one of the best tag teams in wrestling history, having drawn money and put on some tremendous matches while winning umpteen tag titles in the process. It was during those early years in snazzy singlets that Scott wowed audiences by unleashing all manner of state-of-the-art moves, including the Frankensteiner and 450 Splash. The amateur standouts went their separate ways in the late 90s, with the younger Steiner reinventing himself as Big Papa Pump in the NWO. Displaying previously unseen charisma and total contempt for authority, Steiner went from the mid-card to main event and won the WCW heavyweight title on several occasions. Years of injuries and wear and tear ended up seriously hampering his in-ring performances, and the genetic freak wasn't the same breathtaking athlete he had been in his younger years, but as a character and draw, the big bad booty daddy was good value. His subsequent singles run in WWE was dogged by injury and badly mishandled from a creative perspective, but that shouldn't muddy the memory of just how freakishly good Steiner was in his prime. Number 83, Gene Kiniski. Seriously, this guy. What did he actually do besides kick a fake baby into the crowd, develop a foot fetish, and colour his teeth in yellow? I mean, is that really what we're— Oh! Now I see what's happened. I appear to have confused WWE Ruthless Aggression era freak Gene Snitsky with former NWA star Gene Kiniski. Happens to the best of us. Canada's greatest athlete was one of the first pro wrestlers to come via the world of pro football, having been recruited by the Edmonton Eskimos before an injury forced him to focus fully on the grap game. At 6'4" and 270 pounds, Gene was powerful and fast in the ring and won championships wherever he went. The most prestigious was the NWA World's Heavyweight title, which Big Thunder scored by beating Lou Thez in January of 1966. A dominant heel, Kiniski defended his title around the world for 3 solid years before losing the strap to Dory Funk Jr. He never regained the title, but he continued to wrestle and draw crowds, particularly in the Great White North, until his retirement in 1992. He passed away in April 2010 at the age of 81. Number 82, Jumbo Tsuruta. A natural athlete, Tonomi Tsuruta did a bit of swimming, basketball, and even sumo in high school before becoming an amateur wrestler at university. He was good, like competed at the 1972 Olympics good, before he was scouted by All Japan Pro Wrestling promoter Giant Baba. After being sent to train with Dory Funk Jr. in the Amarillo territory, Jumbo Tsuruta returned home to become one of the true workhorses for All Japan. A technical powerhouse who took pride in his flawless execution, Tsuruta was a major star and wrestled around 200 matches per year between 1974 and his illness in 1992. In that time, he became the first ever Triple Crown champion when he unified the PWF Heavyweight title, NWA United National title, and NWA International Heavyweight title, competed against a laundry list of legends and Hall of Famers, formed a formidable tag team with Genichiro Tenryu, and had a sensational sensational rivalry with his understudy Mitsuharu Misawa. Those aren't his only accomplishments, however. I didn't even mention being named in Tokyo Sports Match of the Year 7 times in a 13-year period, but the big thing about Jumbo Tsuruta was how far ahead of its time his overall act was as a big man who could sell while moving around so gracefully. Tsuruta's career met a sad end when illness pushed him out of the spotlight and eventually led to his passing in 2000 at the age of 49. A super consistent and well-decorated draw, Jumbo Tsuruta was the man in the 80s. Number 81, Lex Luger. Lex Luger has his critics, and plenty of them at that, but at the end of the day, his career and accomplishments are nothing to be sniffed at. One of the many that traded in the gridiron for the squared circle, Lex Luger began his career working for Championship Wrestling from Florida before moving to Mid-Atlantic and then WCW. Possessing one of, if not the best bodies in the business, Luger immediately stood out and got opportunities based on his look, if not his still very raw talent. While Lex wasn't the same caliber of worker that veterans like Ricky Steamboat, Ric Flair, Terry Funk and others were, and really how many are, he did learn on the job and by the late 1980s was more than credible and occasionally showed flashes of greatness. Over time, Luger grew into the role of a headliner and pulled his weight in main event matches. An underwhelming stay in WWF, where he failed to catch on as the next Hogan-like babyface, was a missed opportunity, but the total package put all of that in the rear view when he jumped back to WCW and became one of the biggest and most popular stars of the Monday Night Wars, even toppling Hollywood Hogan for the belt during the height of the New World Order. Yes, he could be accused of sometimes being lazy and he's battled the dreaded personal demons, but the former Tag Team United States and World Heavyweight Champ was much better than his reputation sometimes seems to suggest. Number 80, Barry Windham. Unlike Lex Luger, Barry Windham was a complete natural and took to professional wrestling like a boy from Sweetwater, Texas takes to, I don't know, hunting animals, drinking beer, and kissing the flag, which I can only assume is what people from Sweetwater, Texas like to do. It helps that Windham was the son of the legendary Blackjack Mulligan, a feared brawler who was a big star in the 60s and 70s. After shedding the Blackjack Mulligan Jr. name, Windham became a mainstay of Championship Wrestling from Florida and followed that with a brief excursion to the WWF. In the late 80s, Big Baz grew into one of the best workers in the business. Effortlessly smooth and exuding a natural charisma, he was a popular hero and a hated villain. Never more so than when he turned on Luger and joined up with the Four Horsemen in what many consider that stable's strongest lineup. The perennial Nearly Man finally snatched the NWA Heavyweight title at Super Brawl 1993, the in-ring peak of his career. Some commentators will say that Windham never truly lived up to his enormous potential, but the 20-year full-time career he had was better than most could dream of, and when he was on, there were few as good as he was. Just don't mention the stalker. Number 79, Satoru Sayama. There aren't too many wrestlers from the 1980s who you look at and think, hey, they would fit seamlessly with today's performers. Satoru Sayama, aka the original Tiger Mask, is most certainly one of them. Undersized at the time of his 1976 debut, Sayama was sent by New Japan overseas to England and Mexico to bulk up and gain experience in different styles. When he returned, it was as Tiger Mask, a gimmick based on a popular anime. Initially scoffed at, Sayama instantly won audiences over with his portrayal. Ultra quick and performing complicated and risky moves and sequences with astonishing accuracy and believability, Tiger Mask was known as the best junior heavyweight in the world during the first half of the 1980s. He also became a true draw and headline attraction, something the junior heavyweights had not been afforded prior to his rise. That initial run was fleeting, and Sayama eventually left New Japan in order to wrestle elsewhere, altering his style to something more closely resembling MMA. A controversial character outside the ring who once wrote a business-exposing book called Kayfabe, Sayama has been an inspiration and influence for the hundreds who have attempted to follow in his footsteps, and his in-ring work during his prime stands in a class of its own. Number 78, Jimmy Snuka. Prior to the birth of Hulkamania, Jimmy Superfly Snuka was Vince McMahon Jr.'s top-level babyface of choice, making a name for himself in territories like Hawaii, Portland, and the Carolinas, as well as in Japan during the 1970s. Snuka came into WWF in 1982 as a heel managed by Captain Lou Albano. He had some great early matches with Bob Backlund for the WWF title and quickly won fans over with his high-flying moves like the Superfly Splash. Snuka ditched Albano and became a babyface, and with it, a major draw for WWF's arena business, which included frequent shows in Madison Square Garden. It was in the Garden and following a cage match with Don Morocco that Snuka landed himself on the highlight reel in perpetuity with his most famous Superfly Splash ever from the top of the cage itself. The Hulkster may have taken the spotlight as the rock and wrestling era boomed, but Snuka was a major part of the package, and his absence was felt when he left the company in the summer of '85. Snuka's post-WWF career saw him wrestle in Japan, make a return, and then leave again to become one of the cornerstones of early-day ECW. His reputation outside the ring is blighted by the murky death of his then-girlfriend Nancy Argentino, but based strictly on talent, drawing power, and impact in the industry, Snuka, who died in 2017, does deserve his place on this countdown. Number 77, Tatsumi Fujinami. One of the first true homegrown stars in New Japan history, as well as a founding father, Tatsumi Fujinami has been wrestling for over 50 years. A gifted technician, Fujinami began his career in 1971, with the Dragon wrestling for New Japan, Mid-Atlantic, in Mexico, and in the WWF, where he won the junior heavyweight title. He moved up to the heavyweight ranks during the 80s, ushering in a new era of success for the man credited with inventing the Dragon Sleeper, Dragon Suplex, and Dragon Screw. A major star in the land of the rising sun, Fujinami won the IWGP heavyweight title 6 times in a 10-year period between 1988 and 98. He was also the first person to simultaneously hold the IWGP and NWA title after beating Ric Flair in the Tokyo Dome. Tremendously versatile, Fujinami was able to have great matches with opponents of any style, whether it be technical, brawling, flying, or submission-based. I mean, when Bret Hart says he looks up and wants to emulate you, you know you must be pretty good. Adapting to injuries and older age, Fujinami was still able to have good matches even while past his athletic prime due to his immense experience and tight grasp of psychology. Influential between the ropes and behind the scenes, Tatsumi Fujinami was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2015. Number 76, Abdullah the Butcher. One of the great things about professional wrestling is its variety. You've got your technical masters, your high flyers, your brawlers, and your morbidly obese monsters who stab people in the head with a fork. Variety. It's called variety. Larry Shreve entered the business as a young man and toiled on the Canadian indies in the 50s and 60s before settling on the gimmick of Abdullah the Butcher. The madman from Sudan was a reckless, vicious sadist who beat his opponents without mercy in matches that typically devolved into sprawling bloodbaths. He often needed a handler to contain him and do his talking in promos, and was very much in the special attraction category. Willing to bleed and happy to carve up his unfortunate foes, the Butcher was a big star in the United States, Canada, and Puerto Rico, but an even bigger one in Japan. If you're watching an Abby match, well, you're not going to see a lot of finesse, and his style really isn't for everyone. But when it comes to that style, he was one of the best and most committed to it, and really pushed the boundaries when it came to hardcore wrestling. Knowing that he shouldn't stay in one territory for too long, Abdullah managed to preserve his aura while repulsing those with weak stomachs throughout the decades. As a draw and a character, Abdullah was unparalleled. Despite never wrestling a match for the organization, he was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2012 in recognition of his achievements within the industry. Number 75, Mil Mascaras. Making it onto your country's postage stamp is a pretty good indicator of fame, wouldn't you say? Not too much is known about Aaron Rodriguez Arellano, but his alter ego of Mil Mascaras, aka the Man of 1,000 Masks, has left a true impact on not just Lucha Libre, but on the wider Mexican culture. He debuted in 1963 and was immediately popular as a heavyweight who preferred a mat-based style. Overseas, however, he was one of the first luchadors to show American and Japanese audiences high-flying moves and became one of the first masked wrestlers to receive international recognition as a babyface. The Globetrotter kept very busy during the 70s and 80s, not just in the ring, but as the star of many major motion pictures. A genuine draw who went to great lengths to conceal his true identity and protect the business, one of Mil Mascaras's drawbacks was that he could be considered selfish due to his unwillingness to sell and aversion to losing. But the money he generated by taking this approach was significant, and when he wanted to, he could really put on a show. Wrestling into his late 70s, Mil Mascaras proved not just the benefits of physical conditioning, but also of taking such a hardline approach in bubble wrapping his mystique. He was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2012. Number 74, Scott Hall. Hey yo. Perhaps the best worker and biggest star to never win a world title in a major promotion, Scott Hall nonetheless had a distinguished career full of memorable matches and moments, regardless of the fact that his well-documented substance abuse issues routinely overshadowed what he did in the ring. As was the case for many of his ilk during the era, Hall gained experience in the territories including Florida, the Carolinas, and in the AWA, where he usually worked lower in the card and often in tag teams. His time in WCW as the Diamond Stud hinted at his potential, but it was far from Hall's big break. That came when he left WCW and signed with the WWF, where he cannily avoided a proposed G.I. Joe gimmick and transformed into Razor Ramon after doing his best Tony Montana impression for a bemused Vince McMahon who hadn't yet seen Scarface. From 1992 to 96, the bad guy was one of the Fed's top stars, but dismayed by his plateauing pay and push, jumped to WCW right as the Monday Night War was heating up. A founding member of the New World Order, Hall, with Kevin Nash and Hulk Hogan, changed the business, and though there would be a notable decline as his personal demons took hold, Hall's work remained a high standard. Unfortunately, his later life and career were clouded by his battle to get and remain clean and sober. Hall managed to defy critics who wrote him off by living long enough to be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame before he passed away in 2022, aged 63. Bad times don't last, but bad guys do. Number 73, Verne Gagne. Perhaps more well known for his exploits as a promoter, it's worth remembering that Verne Gagne was himself a formidable wrestler back in his day. A two-time NCAA champion at the University of Minnesota, Gagne was an alternative for the US men's wrestling team at the 1948 Olympics and was drafted by NFL Chicago Bears. Forced to choose between football and pro wrestling, Gagne went with the latter. He wrestled for the NWA, capturing the World Junior Heavyweight title in the process until 1960, when he formed the breakaway AWA. Verne was, naturally, the promotion's first world champion, a title he would go on to hold 10 times in total. Always the home state babyface, Gagne's longest reign with the belt clocked in at around the 7-year mark. Favoring an old-school technical style, Verne's bouts were solid, but the man himself was criticized for failing to move with the times, as well as pushing himself and son Greg too hard. But for all the criticism, Verne Gagne was believable and drew money on top for decades. He also had a hand in training future stars like Bob Backlund, Sergeant Slaughter, and Ric Flair at his notoriously difficult training camp. His steadfast refusal to embrace sports entertainment at a time where professional wrestling was evolving would prove to be his undoing as a promoter, but Gagne wasn't about to compromise his principles and change the philosophy of the AWA. When it came to the style his own company favored, he led by example. A member of various wrestling halls of fame, Verne Gagne died in 2015, aged 89. Number 72, El Canek. While some luchadors have been able to become major stars outside of Mexico, El Canek was really only ever a major star within his home country. And that's not a knock on Canek, whose real name was revealed as Felipe Estrada when he competed in and won an MMA fight in 2001, mask and all, because he was Mexico's top heavyweight from the mid-1970s through to the early 90s. Making his debut in 1972, Canek worked for EMLL for those first couple of years before switching to the UWA, where he became the biggest star in the company, cemented when he defeated multi-time NWA champion Lou Thez to win the UWA heavyweight title in 1978. In Mexico, the El Canek versus an outsider formula was used by the UWA to great success, and he was one of the few men to score a victory over Andre the Giant. When he wasn't drawing big houses for the UWA, Canek could be found touring New Japan, where his technical mastery helped him fit in perfectly. The Mayan leader-inspired grappler held the UWA title 15 times all told before the promotion closed down and was absorbed by AAA in 1995. He has since wrestled for various leagues in Mexico, and though he's obviously been winding down for the past 20 or so years, El Canek has wrestled wrestled a match every calendar year since his debut, barring 2007. Number 71, Christian Cage. If you look up the word consistency in the dictionary, you will find a picture of Christian Cage. At the moment, you'll also find him if you look up the word prick, but that's a different story. Jay Rezzo, with best friend Adam Edge Copeland, grew up dreaming of becoming a WWF superstar, and after working on the indies for a few years and attending a WWF training camp, was signed to a full-time deal. His quick progress was no surprise really, considering how naturally gifted he was in the ring when it came to positioning, bumping, selling, and his knack for knowing how to put a match together. One of the best tag wrestlers of the Attitude Era, alongside his brother, Christian became a single star in his own right after their inevitable split. Despite his great matches and ever-improving character and promo work, Captain Charisma would have to go outside of WWE to win his first singles world championship, which he did by bagging the NWA World's Heavyweight title as a member of the TNA roster. His TNA run was rock solid, and Christian's momentum continued when he rejoined WWE, winning the ECW and World Heavyweight titles. A valuable asset for any roster to have, Christian Cage can have a great match with anyone, something he's proven night in and night out over the past quarter of a century. Just don't tell him if your dad's dead. Number 70, Owen Hart. The youngest of the Hart brothers, Owen Hart was arguably the most naturally talented. Athletically gifted and expected to enter the business like the rest of the Canadian clan, Owen initially resisted the lure of professional wrestling and looked towards other careers, but soon found himself taking bumps and bending bones in Calgary, the UK, and Japan as he traveled the world and gained experience in various styles ahead of his first foray to WWE. That first run as the Blue Blazer wasn't much to write home about, but Owen got another bite of the WWF cherry a couple of years later after further touring Japan and Germany and flirting with WCW. No longer under a mask, Owen initially teamed with Jim Neidhart and Coco Beware before pursuing a singles career. It was during his feud with his big brother Brett that the world finally got to see and appreciate the true scope of the Rocket's talent and skill. He didn't manage to take the WWF title away from the Hitman in any of their classic encounters, but the two-time Slammy Award winner could boast about Intercontinental, European, and Tag Team title reigns, as well as a 1994 King of the Ring tournament triumph. A beloved member of the locker room and a committed family man outside of it, Owen tragically died in an accident at the 1999 Over the Edge pay-per-view. He was just 34. While the nature of his passing is hard to overlook, it should not overshadow the extraordinary career of a great man. Number 69, Ted DiBiase. Ted DiBiase decided to get into the wrestling business after an injury prohibited a potential professional football career, despite his adoptive father Iron Mike DiBiase literally dying in the ring from a heart attack when Ted was just 15 years old. Trained by the Funks and originally billed as the son of Iron Mike, Ted would break in and Bill Watts' Mid-South promotion before that was interrupted with a short stint in Vince McMahon Sr.'s WWF. When Ted returned to Mid-South afterwards, he became one of the promotion's biggest stars, while also frequently touring Japan. After Mid-South, which became the UWF, was acquired by Jim Crockett Promotions in 1987, Ted signed with WWF and adopted the gimmick that would catapult him to worldwide fame. Christened the $1 Million Man, DiBiase's new character was reportedly the one that Vince McMahon Jr. would have given himself if he were to become a wrestler. One of the top heels in the company, the $1 Million Man would throw money at whatever problems he couldn't take care of in the ring. Speaking of which, Ted was widely considered one of the best workers in the world at this point and had great matches with just about everyone while also doing first-class promo and character work. DiBiase quietly retired from bump taking in 1993 due to injuries and became a manager. Number 68, Bruiser Brody. Huss! 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 Few wrestlers in history have played the Wild Man character as convincingly as Frank Goodish, aka Bruiser Brody. An imposing football player in his youth, Goodish never quite managed to make it to the majors, with professional wrestling turning out to be his true calling. Trained by Fritz von Erich, Bruiser Brody worked for various different territories in the United States, including for Vince McMahon Sr.'s WWF, but he was used more as a special attraction by the majority of promoters. An intense, fearsome fearsome brawler, Brody became a major star in Japan, a country he toured extensively during the 1980s, reportedly getting some $16,000 per week from All Japan. A willing bleeder, Brody's matches often became bloodbaths, his face and body bearing the scars of his labor. He wasn't just a hardcore wrestler, however, and formed a winning team with fellow West Texas A&M alumnus Stan Hansen, the duo having a great series of gripping bouts with the Funks. King Kong had a reputation mined for being difficult to work with backstage and in the ring, something exemplified in his notorious cage match meeting with a green Lex Luger. A breakdown in communication led to Brody simply stopping mid-match, resulting in Luger, rightly scared for what might be about to happen, hightailing it out of there. A territorial mainstay and an icon in Japan, Brody's life came to a senseless, tragic end at 42 when he was stabbed in a Puerto Rico locker room by Jose Invader 1 Gonzalez. Number 67, Batista. Told by the geniuses running the WCW power plant training facility that he would never make it in the business, Dave Bautista proved his doubters wrong by not just making it, but by becoming one of the biggest stars of his era. The Animal put his WCW disappointment behind him by signing a developmental deal with WWE. While stationed in Ohio Valley Wrestling, Big Dave was one of the crop of next-generation stars that included John Cena, Randy Orton, Brock Lesnar, and Shelton Benjamin. The early signs weren't great for the muscular former Leviathan, who debuted on WWE television as Reverend Devon's bodyguard, Deacon Batista. Thankfully, WWE quickly figured the formula out, and Batista grew as a performer by leaps and bounds while alongside Orton under the learning tree of Triple H and Ric Flair as a member of the Dominant Evolution. Fans responded to Batista and he got over in a big way, so much so that he took the Mania headline spot primed for Orton and turned on the Game and the Nature Boy ahead of winning the World Heavyweight title in the main event of the 21st Granddaddy of them all. Over the course of the following 5 years, the Animal was one of the superstars WWE built their brand around, and he stepped up to the plate by greatly improving every facet of his act. He's since parlayed that talent into becoming a genuine Hollywood superstar, while coming back to WWE for a couple of short but memorable runs. Number 66, Bob Backlund. Do not be fooled by the eccentric old bloke in the bow tie who wants you to recite every former president of the United States before he gives you an autograph, because that oddball in suspenders is as legit as they come. After excelling at American football and amateur wrestling in high school and college, Bob Backlund was trained for professional wrestling by Eddie Sharkey and worked for the AWA and various other territories during the 1970s. The clean-cut babyface with the technical style joined Vince McMahon Sr.'s Worldwide Wrestling Federation in '76, establishing himself as a contender for the promotion's heavyweight title. Backlund went on to beat superstar Billy Graham for the belt in Madison Square Garden, an arena he would headline as champion many times over the next several years. The 7th wrestler to hold the gold, Backlund is still one of the longest reigning champions in history, with his 2 reigns totaling a recognized 2,138 days. He was a box office draw and a model employee, but the white meat All-American Boy Next Door act eventually tired and Backlund was forced to step aside, lest he be crushed by the oncoming red and yellow tidal wave. That big run was really the pinnacle for Bob, who continued to wrestle on and off for WWE, including a great stint during the New Generation era where he improbably won the WWF title for a second time, also wrestling in Japan and other organizations until the Hall of Famer called it a day in 2018. Number 65, Jake Roberts. Professional wrestling may be a physical industry where the ultra-athletic, genetically superior, and aesthetically pleasing have a distinct advantage, but pro wrestling is as much about the mind as it is the body beautiful. And there are a few in history of the business who have understood the psychology aspect as well as Jake the Snake Roberts. The son of wrestler and promoter and all-around evil bastard Grizzly Smith, Jake made a name for himself in the Mid-South, Mid-Atlantic, Georgia Championship and world-class territories, arriving in the WWF as a well-rounded performer with a decade of experience under his belt. Aided by his serpentine sidekick and possessing the most brutal finisher in the game, the DDT, Roberts wasn't renowned for having 5-star matches, and he never won a title in WWE. However, Jake made you feel something every single time and could lure you into a match, angle, or promo to the point where, as a viewer, you became completely engrossed. With Roberts, it was about the moments, the feuds, and the eerie interviews. His potential was sadly never fully realized, and if it was, we can only assume he would be higher on this here list due to a combination of bad luck, a penchant for bridge burning, and the dreaded personal demons. That said, Jake had remarkable staying power, almost despite himself, and the WWE Hall of Famer was one of the standout characters of the 80s and 90s. Number 64, Samoa Joe. The only wrestler to have held titles in WWE, AEW, TNA, and Ring of Honor, Samoa Joe has earned every accolade across his bruising career. The Samoan submission machine took a route that many from his era took. He honed his class on smaller independent shows before gaining seasoning in Japan and then cementing himself as Ring of Honor's premier talent during a time where the promotion was overflowing with promising prospects. Joe then rose through the ranks in TNA, enjoying a fruitful near-decade-long run for Dixie Carter's company, including a stint with the world title. Wherever Joe went and whoever he saw himself standing across the ring from, one thing remained the same: the quality of his matches. Frighteningly agile for a super heavyweight, the big man was able to combine various styles into one hard-hitting package and brought an intensity and a sense of realism that not many could hope to emulate. Post-TNA, Joe finally got his WWE main roster run after a great spell in NXT and had more tremendous matches with a variety of opponents, while also showcasing his maturity on the microphone by delivering some blistering promos. Samoa Joe really was and is the full package, and though he may be physically feeling the effects of almost a quarter century of taxing battles, WWE's loss was very much AEW's gain, becoming their world champion in December 2023. Number 63, Paul Orndorff. Even before he got into the wild and wacky world of professional wrestling, Paul Orndorff had already lived a memorable life that saw him try his hand at numerous athletic endeavors, from football and track and field to bodybuilding and arm wrestling. Athletically gifted and genuinely tough thanks to a childhood spent scrapping on the mean streets of Florida, Orndorff opted to give the grap game a shot after his NFL dream ended because of injury. Trained by the notoriously rough Hiro Matsuda, Orndorff began in the Sunshine State before gaining experience in Memphis, St. Louis, the Carolinas, Georgia, and then Mid-South. It was really while working for Bill Watts that Mr. Wonderful blossomed into a big-time draw and a well-rounded worker. Having turned down the opportunity to work for WWF a couple of years earlier, Orndorff didn't knock them back a second time and debuted for Vince McMahon's promotion in late 1983. Paired with Roddy Piper and instantly pushed as a big deal, he would main event the first WrestleMania alongside the Rowdy Scott as they fell to Hulk Hogan and Mr. T. Orndorff's feud with the Hulkster was box office gold, or should that be red and yellow, and their run of big matches did monster business. Regrettably, Orndorff sustained an injury during it, which would hamper him for the rest of his career. He was still a great worker, but settled into a mid-card role before easing into retirement. Inducted into all manner of Hall of Fames, Orndorff sadly passed away on July 12, 2021, aged 71. Number 62, Goldberg. As Paul Orndorff's in-ring career wound down, he helped prepare the next generation of WCW stars as a trainer at the power plant. One of that facility's most famous students was Bill Goldberg, another ex-football player looking to make the sports entertainment transition. Big, jacked, and raw-boned, the former Atlanta Falcon wasn't a fan of the business, but was encouraged to get into it while the getting was good by Sting and Lex Luger. One of WCW's true organic success stories, Goldberg caught on with fans thanks to his explosive squash match victories, which showcased his strength and power, but was short enough so as not to expose his inexperience. Within 10 months of debuting, the man amassed a highly embellished winning streak and beat Hollywood Hogan for the WCW heavyweight title in front of a record WCW crowd. The rest of his WCW career certainly had its ups and downs, but Goldberg was always over and was one of the few main eventers that latter-day WCW created from scratch. His one-year post-WCW run in WWE was far from perfect, and his comebacks in recent years have been a case of ever-diminishing yet gold-laden returns, but Goldberg was and is a legit superstar who may not be the best worker from a technical standpoint, but could generate serious excitement in his pomp. Alright, who's next? Number 61, The Ultimate Warrior. Next is The Ultimate Warrior, another star who was very much in the Bill Goldberg mold. Jim Hellwig was an amateur bodybuilder who got into the business despite not being a fan because of his impressive look. In plain truth, Hellwig, who teamed with an equally green Sting in the UWF before moving on to World Class where he became Dingo Warrior, was an absolutely atrocious wrestler in those early days. His work may not have been great, but his killer physique brought him to the attention of Vince McMahon, who promptly signed him and strapped the rocket to his bulging back. In the WWF, the Ultimate Warrior was a comic book hero come to life and seemingly the natural successor to Hulk Hogan. WWF hoped that would be the case when the Hulkster quote-unquote passed the torch to Warrior in the main event of WrestleMania 6. However, things didn't quite turn out that way. Warrior's title run didn't set the world on fire, and the months and years after he dropped the belt would be fraught with backstage issues. Hellwig could be hard to work with, to say the least, and he and McMahon had a fractious relationship, but the truth is that Warrior was good for business, even if he invariably took off due to yet another dispute with the boss. The Ultimate Warrior isn't everyone's cup of protein shake, but he was a massive star during a golden era and actually had more decent matches than you probably remember, even if he did have his fair share of clunkers too. Number 60, Riki Choshu. One of the most important people in the history of New Japan Pro Wrestling, Riki Choshu was successful there as a wrestler, trainer, and booker across several decades. Real name Mitsuyo Yoshida, he played baseball and competed in judo at high school before switching to wrestling, which he excelled at. He would have been on the Olympic team for Japan in 1972, but the coaches prevented him from doing so due to him being part Korean. So he represented South Korea at the games instead. Easy come, easy go, eh? Trained by Masa Saito in the New Japan Dojo, Riki Choshu debuted in 1974 and worked his way up the card as well as going overseas to get more experience. A solid all-rounder who could work with anyone, Choshu became the first traitor heel in New Japan when he turned on Tatsuji Fujinami and formed the Renegade Revolutionary Army stable. Choshu's feud with Fujinami changed the face of main event wrestling in Japan, as two homegrown stars were the focal points rather than a top babyface taking on a typically American outsider. Charismatic and with a dynamic in-ring style, the Revolution Warrior helped change main event Japanese wrestling to being more fast-paced and impactful both in New Japan and All Japan. The inventor of the Sasori Gatami, aka Sharpshooter / Scorpion Deathlock, Choshu helped draw many million-dollar-plus gates. The three-time IWGP Heavyweight Champion called time on his career in his late 60s. Number 59, Jack Briscoe. The first Native American to win an NCAA National Wrestling Championship, Jack Briscoe went his entire senior year at Oklahoma State without being taken down. A tremendously gifted amateur grappler, Briscoe grew up a fan of professional wrestling too and turned pro in 1965. It only took him 5 months to win his first title, the first of many he would hold as someone who primarily wrestled for various NWA territories. Credited by his peers as being one of the very best wrestlers of his era, Jack won the NWA heavyweight title for the first time in 1973 by beating Harley Race. He briefly lost it to Giant Baba after 500 days, then held it for another year, defending against all comers before dropping it to perennial rival Terry Funk. Jack and brother Jerry would wrestle the Funks all over the world across many years. Jack didn't regain the NWA title and seemed content to bounce around from place to place, including a very fun couple of years in the Mid-Atlantic territory, where he had a tremendous series of matches with Roddy Piper. Jack and younger brother Gerald went to work for Vince McMahon in 1984 after helping the promoter acquire Georgia Championship Wrestling, but Vinnie Mac's three-ring circus didn't really do much for the shooter, who quit the business entirely rather than be associated with something that was fast becoming more entertainment than sport. A believable, credible, and consistent member of several Hall of Fames, Jack Briscoe passed away in 2010 at the age of 68. Number 58, El Hijo del Santo. It can be a burden for the child of a famous wrestler to try and follow in their parents' footsteps, especially if that parent is considered a beloved cultural icon. It was even tougher for Jorge Rodriguez, aka El Hijo del Santo, as he was the only one of El Santo's 10 children to get into the biz. The son of the saint debuted in 1982, initially as El Korak, before donning the instantly recognizable silver mask, tights, and cape of his father. An outstanding performer from the get-go, he was voted Mexico's Rookie of the Year in 1983, wowing audiences with his super smooth, high-flying abilities. One of the biggest draws in Mexico in the mid to late 80s, El Hijo del Santo may not have been as popular as his father, but he was considered a much better technical wrestler, and his matches helped drive the business into the future. Wrestling for UWA, CMLL, and then AAA, he was a major star and always put in a shift, especially when matched against his main rival, Negro Casas, with their series being likened to Flair vs. Steamboat by lucha experts. In the the 90s, El Hijo del Santo formed a team with Eddie Guerrero in tribute to the unit formed by El Santo and Eddie's father Gory. They split and feuded, leading to the classic match between Los Gringos Locos and El Hijo del Santo and Octagon at AAA's When Worlds Collide pay-per-view. Still doing his thing in his 60s, El Hijo del Santo is as timeless as his attire. Number 57, Karl Gotch. Nicknamed the God of Pro Wrestling in Japan, the Belgian-born Charles Istaz, aka Karl Gotch, has left a significant imprint on the business. No relation to Frank Gotch, Istaz excelled as an amateur wrestler and competed in the 1948 Olympics in freestyle and Greco-Roman wrestling. Noted for his incredible conditioning, strength, and endurance, Istaz wrestled in Europe during the 50s before moving to the United States towards the end of the decade, where he adopted the Karl Gotch moniker. His unflashy style and stoic personality didn't endear him to US audiences or promoters, but he was right at home in the land of the rising sun. Gotch beat Antonio Inoki in the main event of the very first New Japan show, though his days as an active performer were nearing an end and he only wrestled sporadically for the next decade. It was behind the scenes as a booker and trainer that Gotch made his biggest impact, schooling the next generation of young lions, including future legends like Satoru Sayama, Tatsuji Fujinami, Akira Maeda, and Minoru Suzuki. Several of his protégés would have a big influence on mixed martial arts. The innovator of the cradle and tombstone pile drivers, Gotch also added a little PS to his friend-slash-rival Lou Thesz's German suplex by incorporating the bridging component. A multi-time Hall of Famer, Karl Gotch passed away in 2007 at the age of 82. Number 56, Nick Bockwinkel. The self-proclaimed smartest man in wrestling, Nick Bockwinkel was good value for that nickname with his advanced in-ring intellect and vast vocabulary on the mic. A potential football career scuppered by a knee injury, Bockwinkel was partially trained to wrestle by Lou Thesz and debuted in 1955. He spent his first 15 years in the business wrestling for various NWA territories, including in Texas for the Funk Family Southwest Sports and for Mid-Pacific. Switching to the AWA in 1970, Bockwinkel formed a formidable tag team with Ray Crippler Stevens. Managed by Bobby Heenan, the duo managed to win the AWA tag team titles on 3 occasions. Bockwinkel became a single star after working his way up the ladder and eventually unseating AWA promoter and top star Vern Gagne to win the AWA World title. A tremendously effective heel, fans loved to hate the holier-than-thou Bockwinkel, who always had an answer between the ropes or on the stick. Well-spoken, well-dressed, and well-equipped to handle any challenge, Bockwinkel was a masterful villain who really knew how to present himself as a threat, but also build up his babyface foes to the point that fans really believed that they could unseat him. Aging like a fine wine, Bockwinkel continued to be a great worker and draw as he entered his 50s and 60s. A 4-time AWA World Champion, his reputation would doubtless be even stronger if not for a dearth of footage predating the 1970s. Bockwinkel retired in 1987 and passed away in 2015, aged 80. Number 55, The Sheik. No, not the Iron Sheik, though he was a phenomenon in his own way, but the original Sheik, as portrayed by Eddie Farhat. Starting his career as a clean-cut babyface in the late 1940s, Farhat would quickly develop the villainous Sheik persona. A bloodthirsty brawler with no respect for the rules, the Sheik plugged into the audience's fears of foreigners with his dress, pre-match prayer routine, and unintelligible raving promos in something resembling Arabic. Farhat, of Lebanese descent, was a Catholic for what it's worth. Employing the use of various weapons, including spikes and fireballs, the Sheik was a staunch enforcer of kayfabe and went to great lengths to convince fans of his apparently psychotic disposition. This would get him incredible heat, with one fan once pulling a gun on him and attempting to fire it, but the Sheik was not one to stick around in a territory and traveled the globe, shedding claret wherever he went. Farhat was an attraction and drew big money with other attractions like Abdullah the Butcher, and mainly wrestled in Japan during his later career, often teaming with nephew Sabu. Protective of the business until the end, the original Sheik always had an aura about him. The wrestler and promoter passed away in 2003 at the age of 76. He was posthumously inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2007. Number 54, Kenny Omega. The man who broke Dave Meltzer's contentious star rating scale, Kenny Omega has spent the better part of the last decade living up to his best bout machine tag. Making his debut at the tender age of 16, Omega wrestled on the Canadian indie circuit and for Harley Race's World League Wrestling promotion before being invited to a tryout with WWE in 2005. How different wrestling history might have been had Kenny stuck it out in WWE developmental territory Deep South Wrestling after being signed to a contract. As well as returning to the US indie scene, Omega soon forged quite a career for himself in Japan while working for cult favorite DDT. On the domestic front, he kept up appearances in Ring of Honor and Pro Wrestling Guerrilla. It was in these years that it became quite clear that Kenny Omega was a breakout star in waiting. That breakout happened when the cleaner swapped DDT for New Japan and joined up with the Red Hot Bullet Club. In the land of the rising sun, Omega increased his reputation for in-ring excellence tenfold and became the first Canadian to win the IWGP Heavyweight title when he beat Kazuchika Okada for it in 2018. His matches with Okada, Naito, Ibushi, Tanahashi, and others are generally regarded as some of the best in New Japan's history in some quarters. No faint praise when you consider the competition. Omega left New Japan full-time in order to help found AEW and, since becoming All Elite, has helped carry the promotion as a former tag team, trios, and heavyweight champ. His gimmick isn't for everyone, and he has his critics, but anyone with an ounce of objectivity in their being will admit that Kenny Omega is one of the most spectacular professional wrestlers of the last quarter century. Number 53, Toshiaki Kawada. Each of All Japan's four pillars of heaven, Mitsuharu Misawa, Kenta Kobashi, Akira Taue, and Toshiaki Kawada, had their strengths. But of the quartet, it could be said that Kawada had the most fearsome aura. A strong amateur wrestler in his youth, Dangerous K chose the All Japan dojo for his training ahead of New Japan on the advice of his friend Misawa, who had been recruited the year prior. His early years saw him climb up the card and work primarily in tags with Misawa, though in 1992 he had two breakout singles matches, a pair of unsuccessful Triple Crown challenges against Misawa and Stan Hansen. For the rest of the decade, Kawada was one of the best big match performers in the world, displaying a frightening intensity and making everything he did look absolutely brutal, whether they were simply strikes or accidentally inventing the Ganso bomb. This, combined with his mastery of in-ring psychology and realistic selling, made him stand out from his contemporaries. A veritable one-man five-star match factory, Kawada won the Triple Crown 3 times during the 90s and then twice more in the early 2000s, when he became the company's ace following the departures of his fellow three pillars who left to form Noah. Toshiaki Kawada was no second fiddle, and the best of his work stands alongside anyone else's. He smartly retired in 2010, preserving the memories of how incredible he was in his prime. Number 52, Kurt Hennig. Son of Larry the Axe Hennig, young Kurt broke into the business in the AWA, the same promotion that made his father a star. Trained by Larry and Vern Gagne, cool Kurt Hennig was clearly loaded with potential and got a regular gig with WWF after just a year in the business. At that time, he was strictly an undercard act, but when he returned to the company later in the decade, Hennig was one of the most well-rounded wrestlers on the planet, having matured in the AWA thanks to working extensively with veterans like Nick Bockwinkel and Jerry Lawler. Given the gimmick of Mr. Perfect, Hennig excelled as a braggadocious villain who backed up his lofty claims with flawless performances inside the squared circle. A true wrestler's wrestler, Kurt could have a good match with absolutely everybody and often stole the show with his extravagant bumps. A perfect choice for Intercontinental Champion, Hennig had some breathtaking matches as an upper mid-carder, particularly his series of clinics with Bret Hart and also a run on top as Hogan's foil. A bad back injury precipitated his athletic decline and doubtless contributed to his substance abuse issues years later, but Kurt was still a big star and had good matches when he signed with WCW in the late 90s, working as part of the Four Horsemen and the NWO. His life sadly came to an end in 2003 at just 44 years of age. Hennig was posthumously inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame class of 2007. Number 51, Rick Rude. Goodness me, just what exactly are they putting in the water there in Minnesota? Rick Rude was high school buddies with Kurt Hennig, and they attended the same school together while running with a crew that included Road Warrior Hawk, Nikita Koloff, Barry Darsow, and others. The former bouncer and arm wrestler got into the business by initially playing a babyface jobber named Ricky Rude before gaining experience and finding his true calling as a top-level heel. Rude did the territory thing, enjoying stints in Florida's CWF, World Class in Texas, and for Jim Crockett Promotions before WWF came calling. His first WWF run only only lasted around 3 years, but Ravishing Rick managed to pack a lot into that time. The one-time Intercontinental Champion was involved in some very memorable rivalries with the Ultimate Warrior, Jake Roberts, and Ricky Steamboat, but the decision to keep him just below the WWF title spot was a factor in Rude's exit, along with a dispute over pay. He resurfaced in WCW and became the International Heavyweight Champion before a debilitating back injury caused him to retire while still in his prime. He spent the rest of the 90s in non-wrestling roles in ECW, WWE, and WCW, and was apparently prepping for an in-ring comeback when he died on April 20th, 1999, aged 40. Great promo, memorable character, and a hell of a worker, Rick Rude was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2017. And I haven't even mentioned the moustache. Number 50, Giant Baba. Shohei Baba was one of the biggest names in Japanese wrestling, both figuratively and literally. Standing at 6 foot 9 inches tall, Baba was a large athletic man who had a cup of coffee in professional Japanese baseball for the Tokyo Giants, appropriately enough. Shunning a career in film and television, Baba instead tried his hand at pro wrestling and debuted in 1960. While gaining seasoning overseas, Baba the Giant became a star in the States, where he was an attraction due to his size. He was so well regarded that he even handed Bruno Sammartino his first loss at Madison Square Garden via countout in 1961. He became a major star in Japan during the mid-1960s, when the reputation of the business was low following the death of Baba's trainer, the legendary Riki Dozan. A perennial international heavyweight champion, Baba wrestled and beat all of the top foreign stars of the day. While never a great worker, and certainly not by today's standards, he nonetheless had a quiet charisma and was noted for his excellent conditioning. After leaving the Japan Wrestling Alliance in the early 1970s, Baba formed All Japan in 1972, changing the entire industry in the process. As a wrestler, promoter, and booker for the company, Giant Baba was revered the world over. Though his body started to break down during the group's prosperous 1980s and 90s, during which time All Japan was regarded by many as the top promotion in the world, Baba was still a draw and loved wrestling so much that he continued to put himself in lower card comedy matches against other veterans. A true pioneer who reputedly wrestled thousands of matches without missing a single shot, Shohei Baba passed away in January of 1999 at the age of 61. Number 49, AJ Styles. For the past 2 decades, AJ Styles has fought his way to the top of whichever promotion he was wrestling for, tirelessly working to be recognized as one of the very best in his chosen profession. American audiences got their first taste of Styles during the tail end of WCW, but it was in TNA, and to a lesser extent early day Ring of Honor, that fans were exposed to just what the phenomenal one is all about. TNA became AJ's home, and over the course of his 12 years there, he saw and did it all, amassing an impressive list of titles and an even more impressive list of must-see matches. Styles became TNA's Mr. Reliable, adept at wrestling anyone of any size and style and bringing them up to his level, or in exceptionally rare cases, just as easily rising to theirs. Upon leaving TNA, AJ returned to the wider international scene, mixing up with the new generation of up-and-coming talent in Ring of Honor and New Japan, as well as various other promotions, all whilst at the forefront of Bullet Club during what was arguably its hottest period. The matches he had on this globe-trotting excursion were typically of the highest order. The former IWGP Heavyweight Champion finally put pen to paper with WWE in 2016 and defied the critics by not just succeeding in the so-called Land of the Giants, but also by becoming one of the company's MVPs and a multi-time WWE champion. Flying, brawling, technical, babyface, heel, AJ can do it all and is very much his generation's version of Shawn Michaels or Bret Hart, someone who does what he does as well as anyone with almost irritating ease and grace. Number 48, Kazuchika Okada. By no means an instant sensation, it took Kazuchika Okada a little while and a couple of setbacks to finally reach the summit. Trained in his teens by Ultimo Dragon, Okada spent the first few years of his career working primarily for Dragon's Toyamon promotion as well as various indies across the world. He returned to Japan and entered the New Japan Dojo, wrestling as a lightweight to little success. A learning excursion to TNA was without merit, but Okada would return to his home country ready to take on the world. Reinventing himself as the Rainmaker, Okada was immediately positioned at the very top of the card, beating New Japan ace Hiroshi Tanahashi for the IWGP Heavyweight title a month later in what was considered a monumental monumental upset at the time. It took Kazuchika a little while to fully find his feet, but when he did, there was simply no slowing down his rise. In the time since that inaugural title triumph, Okada has been untouchable, adding a further 6 IWGP Heavyweight titles, with one of the reigns standing as the longest in history at 720 days. The face of New Japan's resurgence and international expansion, Okada's matches have broken the star rating scale and helped draw many fans to the product. Still only in his 30s, there's a sense that there's a lot more to come from a man that many consider the perfect professional wrestler, even though he's already made so much history and had tremendous rivalries and matches with just about everyone. Kazuchika Okada can now continue to add to his legacy in America, having left New Japan for AEW in early 2024. Number 47, Vader. Arguably the greatest super heavyweight of all time, Vader combined his sheer size and strength with startling agility to become a major star in the United States and Japan. Forced into retirement from American football due to injuries, Leon White was encouraged to try pro wrestling and received training from Brad Rheingans, the same man who helped train a young Brock Lesnar among others, and got his first national exposure in the AWA. Baby Bull, as he was then known, also toured Austria and Germany in those first few years before getting his big break in New Japan. Vader's demolition job of Antonio Inoki helped get fans, already annoyed at what they had seen on the show beforehand, so riled up that they rioted, the damage severe enough to get New Japan kicked out of Sumo Hall for almost 2 years. It was quite the statement as far as introductions go. Not that Vader minded, because he was too busy becoming the first non-Japanese wrestler to hold the IWGP Heavyweight title and having incredible matches that continually pushed the boundaries of what such a large man could do in a wrestling ring. His performances in the Far East caught the attention of WCW, and after being used sparingly at first, Vader would go on to become a 3-time WCW Heavyweight Champion, engaging in plenty of choice bouts with the likes of Ric Flair, Mick Foley, and Sting along the way. The Mastodon's post-WCW run in WWF was certainly flawed, but he showed glimpses of his best self every now and again. Age and injuries slowed him down, though runs in All Japan and Noah reminded fans what a force he could be. White passed away in 2018 and was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame 4 years later. Number 46, Keiji Muto. One of the first major Japanese wrestling stars to gain a significant fan base outside of his native country, Keiji Muto is a true innovator whose work has stood the test of time. A graduate of the grueling New Japan dojo, Muto first became a star in the United States, where he was sent on the standard learning excursions that Japanese young boys go on in order to gain experience, before starting properly for their home promotion. As the White Ninja, Super Black Ninja, and then the Great Muta, he dazzled American audiences with moves like the Flash Elbow, Handspring Elbow, and Moonsault, seldom seen in the 80s, and became a cult favorite. Back on home soil in the early 90s, Muto became one of New Japan's biggest stars as part of the revered Three Musketeers and captured the IWGP Heavyweight title for the first time in 1992. Whether performing under his given name or as the mysterious Mist Master, Muto always put on a show and had a genuine air of mystery about him, as well as a cool factor that just cannot be taught. After being one of New Japan's biggest stars throughout the decade, Muto did the unthinkable and jumped to rivals All Japan in 2001. Not only did he jump, but he completely reinvented himself by shaving his head, switching up his gear, and changing his ring style to lessen the burden on his knackered knees. A power player in the ring and behind the scenes, Muto has switched organizations several times in the years since and finally hung up his boots in February of 2023 at the age of 60, going out as one of only 2 men to have held the top 3 titles in Japan as well as the NWA title. The body was shot, but the passion was still there. Number 45, it's Sting! Those who witnessed Sting wrestle in his very early years likely had no idea that the muscular man in the black face paint would go on to become one of the best babyfaces in the game. Greener than Goose you-know-what and hardly complimented by likewise unrefined tag partner Jim Ultimate Warrior Hellwig, Steve Borden didn't exactly impress during stays in Memphis or the UWF. When he moved on to Jim Crockett Promotions, however, he came on leaps and bounds. I suppose being in the ring with some of the best in the industry will help with that, eh? One of them, Ric Flair, gave Sting his breakout match at the inaugural Clash of the Champions. Going toe-to-toe with the Nature Boy for 45 minutes signaled that not only did Sting have the athletic goods and a marketable look, but that he could work too. From then on, there was no stopping the Stinger, the consummate good guy and WCW ever-present who could have a great match at the flick of a switch. By the mid-90s, Surfer Sting was ditched in favor of Crow Sting as the icon completely reinvented himself and became even more over in the process. His war against the NWO, one of the hottest angles in pro wrestling history. His best days as a worker may have been behind him after the close of WCW, but Sting was as popular as ever and could still go in the ring when the occasion called for it. His TNA run was longer and better than anyone could have predicted, while his sterling AEW Indian summer has managed to quash the memory of his bungled WWE stay. The Icon's astonishing almost 40-year in-ring career came to an end at AEW Revolution 2024. Showtime is over. Number 44, Lou Thesz. A pro wrestling visionary molded in the amateurs, Lou Thesz is a prime example of how exemplary technique and knowing how to work can lead to prolonged success and career longevity. A proper shooter, Thesz was trained by his Hungarian father and as a teenager began competing in and winning amateur tournaments. His amateur triumphs caught the attention of Tom Pax, a promoter out of St. Louis who encouraged him to go pro. Well versed in legit submission wrestling or hooking, Thesz made his pro debut at just 17 years old. It didn't take him long to find success as a professional, and he became the youngest world heavyweight champion ever when he was just 21. Chosen to represent the NWA as their heavyweight champion in large part due to his cred as a shooter, Thesz would hold the belt on 3 occasions for over a decade in combined length. The originator of moves like the powerbomb, German suplex, STF, and Thesz press, my man Lou was a big star in the United States and Japan, the country where he had his final match against Masahiro Chono at age 74. With that match, Thesz became one of a very select few to have wrestled across 7 different decades. Respected by fans, promoters, and his fellow wrestlers, Lou Thesz helped train many future standouts during his later life and career, while also deriding the business for its lack of authenticity. Though he passed away in 2002, aged 86, Thesz remains a standard bearer and symbol of excellence for wrestlers who prioritize realism and believability in their work. Number 43, Dory Funk Jr. Where his younger brother Terry was wildly charismatic and unpredictable, Dory Funk Jr. was methodical and consistent as clockwork. After playing football and competing in the amateur ranks at school, Dory began wrestling for his father's Amarillo territory in 1963. An outstanding technician, Dory Jr. rarely, if ever, put a foot wrong, displaying a smoothness and committing to a realism that made him a star of the era back when the sport aspect of wrestling took precedence. He won everything there was to win, including multiple tag team titles with Terry while working for Western State Sports, and mixed it up with everyone there was to work with. A true ring general, Dory Jr. could get a good, credible match out of a broom if he so desired, and represented the business with class. That no doubt factored into the decision to make him NWA Heavyweight Champion by booking him to beat Gene Kiniski on February 11th, 1969. Funk held it for 1,563 days before dropping it to Harley Race on a Kansas house show on May 24th, 1973. After that, Dory focused on his tag team with Terry and splitting his time between the US and Japan. A complementary contrast to his more out-there sibling, Dory more than played his part in the countless classics the Funk brothers had at home and abroad. A clear stylistic influence on wrestlers such as Bret Hart, Dory became a formidable trainer in his later career, helping to mold the likes of Edge, Christian, Kurt Angle, and the Hardys in his Funkin' dojo. He even still found time to wrestle one match every year until 2018, by which point he was in his late 70s, a rare breed. Number 42, El Santo. Listen, when they build an actual flippin' statue of you, your place on this list is pretty much guaranteed. Rodolfo Guzman Huerta wrestled under various names after debuting in 1934, before donning his famous silver ensemble as El Santo, aka The Saint, in 1942. Immensely popular and looked upon as a sort of folk hero by the Mexican people, Santo in his prime was more popular than Steve Austin and Hulk Hogan combined, according to Eddie Guerrero. Speaking of, some of Santo's most memorable matches came while teaming with Eddie's father gory as La Pareja Atomica, aka the Atomic Pair. He also had many noteworthy meetings with Blue Demon, another great luchador of the era. Decades before your Dwayne Johnsons and John Cena's, the man in a silver mask was channeling his wrestling popularity into a fruitful film career. They weren't cinematic masterpieces, granted, but Santos starred in over 50 motion pictures where he battled Martians, zombies, and vampire women. Intensely protective of his real-life identity, Huerta never unmasked in public and went to great lengths to conceal his face. He actually only removed his mask once during a televised interview a week before his death in 1984. A consummate babyface, national hero, and one of the industry's first crossover stars, Santos' best years as an in-ring performer may not have been preserved on film, but his status as a cultural icon will forever endure. Number 41, Hiroshi Tanahashi. When a company is struggling, it typically needs a major star, or preferably several stars, to step up and lead them to greener pastures. Hiroshi Tanahashi was largely responsible for not only carrying the load while New Japan were struggling, but helping them enjoy a resurgence too. A baseball player and freestyle wrestler in high school, Tanahashi was recruited to the New Japan dojo in 1998. Hiroshi's rise to stardom began in the mid-2000s, when he, along with Shinsuke Nakamura, was propelled to the main event, winning his first IWGP title in July of 2006. Cementing himself as the company's ace thereafter, Tana would dominate the main event scene over the next 6 years, over which period he won the IWGP title 5 times, and had great matches with Nakamura, Goto, and Nagata until the arrival of Kazuchika Okada. With a new generational dance partner to tangle with, Tanahashi continued to show why he was considered the company's ace, and one of the best in Japanese wrestling history, by contesting further epics with the Rainmaker and the new crop of stars like Kenny Omega, Tetsuya Naito, Kota Ibushi, and a host of others. A great in-ring storyteller with a sky-high wrestling IQ, Tanahashi was also unafraid to lean into his sports entertainment predilections with his air guitar riffing and penchant for extravagance. Ostensibly in the twilight of his career, the ace of the universe is still in that upper tier as he nears his late 40s. He has nothing left to prove and has left behind a legacy of classic matches, epic title reigns, and crucially, as the man who helped save a professional wrestling institution. Number 40, Manami Toyota. It's pretty amazing that one of the most athletic workers of her or any era came into the industry without an athletic background. Manami Toyota didn't play any sports growing up, but dreamed of being a pro wrestler, and out of thousands of applicants was chosen for the All Japan Women's Wrestling Dojo at the age of 15. Debuting at 16, she was in the main events by the time she was 18, having come to prominence thanks to her incredible athleticism, desire, and innovation. Toyota specialized in dropkicks, sometimes performing 10 in a row with perfect form, and was the very first person to hit them from the top rope to the floor. She also came up with various dives and suplexes, including her finisher, the Japanese Ocean Cyclone Suplex. A total show stealer, Manami dominated the 90s and proved to be shockingly durable, considering her high-octane style and knack for taking full-on bumps. A tape trader's dream in another era, Manami Toyota was involved in many so-called 5-star matches, 13 according to Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer newsletter. More than that, she had a genuine connection with the fans, many of whom cried and begged her not to go when she announced that she was leaving All Japan Women in 2002. One of the best to ever do it, female or otherwise, Toyota officially retired in 2017, bringing a glittering 30-year career to a close. Number 39, Stan Hansen. The madman from Borga, Texas, Stan Hansen enjoyed some success in the United States, but his legend was cultivated in Nippon. A college football standout who became friends with Frank Goodish, aka Bruiser Brody at West Texas A&M, Hansen gained early infamy when he broke WWF champion Bruno Sammartino's neck, leading to a short but intense rivalry, their big grudge match attracting over 32,000 to Shea Stadium in New York. After his run in New York, the Lariat focused his attentions on Japan, first with New Japan and then All Japan. The first foreigner to beat both Antonio Inoki and Giant Baba, Hansen would work for All Japan pretty much full-time from 1982 until 2000, winning titles and having classic matches both as a singles and tag wrestler. A former AWA champion, Hansen was certainly surly in the squared circle. What he lacked in finesse, he more than made up for with his intensity and became famed for his super stiff brawls. None more so than the battle with Vader that saw him dislodge his opponent's eye. That was just one of many epic and violent battles that made Stan the man in Japan. The four-time Triple Crown champion hung up his bull rope in 2000 and was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2016. Number 38, Jushin Liger. Believe it or not, groundbreaking innovator Keiichi Yamada was not initially accepted to the New Japan dojo as he didn't meet their height requirements. Undeterred, Yamada traveled to Mexico and trained there before being invited into the fold back home. He debuted in 1984 under his real name before going on excursions to England and Canada and then returning to Nippon in order to wrestle as Jushin Thunder Liger. While innovating moves like the tilt-a-whirl backbreaker, running sit-out Liger Bomb, and shooting star press, Liger helped turn around New Japan's junior heavyweight division, invariably having great matches with anyone he was put in the ring with. Helping put the division behind the scenes, it was Yamada's idea to stage tournaments like the Super J Cup, helping put more emphasis on his preferred style of wrestling. A brain tumor threatened to slow him down in the mid-90s, but Liger came back better than ever and continued to rule New Japan's junior heavyweight division, while also appearing in WCW and later for other promotions around the world. Whether babyface or heel, in the main event or the opening match, fans knew that they would get their money's worth with Liger. Wrestling well into his 50s, the mask and full body outfit helped preserve his aura, while Yamada was such a good worker that he was able to adapt and stay relevant even as age and injury slowed him down. Transcending labels like junior heavyweight or cruiserweight, Liger was simply an astonishing wrestler for close to 40 years. Number 37, Chris Benoit. Any discussion of Chris Benoit will inevitably turn to the last weekend of his life. And while we will never make excuses or try to justify Benoit's heinous final actions, he was so good at his profession that in an objective discussion around the best to ever do it, there is no way his name cannot be in the conversation. A diehard fan of the Dynamite Kid, Benoit followed a similar path to stardom, paying his dues first in Stampede Wrestling and then overseas in Japan. Graduating from the brutal New Japan dojo, Benoit, as the masked Pegasus Kid and then Wild Pegasus, became a big star in the land of the rising sun and helped usher in a new style of wrestling that would become commonplace a few years later. Benoit stopped off in ECW on the way to WCW, where his work was customarily first-rate. Not that management noticed though, and tired of diving headbutting the glass ceiling, he radically walked out after finally winning the World Championship and jumped to WWF in early 2000. An ultra-intense perfectionist, if Benoit was in the ring, you knew the match was going to be good at the very least. The Rabid Wolverine went on to win just about everything there was to win in WWE, his crowning moment coming in the main event of WrestleMania 20 when he won the World Heavyweight title. An unspeakably tragic end, but when it came to bell, Benoit was among the very elite. Number 36, Bryan Danielson. A true student of the game, Bryan Danielson has been one of the best wrestlers on the planet for coming up a quarter of a century now. A graduate of Shawn Michaels Wrestling Academy, he was then mentored by William Regal while in WWE Developmental, before being released and taking to the independent and international scenes with gusto. A Ring of Honor icon, the American Dragon also toiled overseas and gained invaluable experience wherever he went, most notably in the UK and in Japan. When he arrived back in WWE in 2009, he was as well-traveled and well-rounded as anyone in the locker room. Not that that worked in his favor initially, as the newly dubbed Daniel Bryan had to fight against the stigma of being a smaller, more ordinary-looking indie darling. However, the cream always rises to the top, and D-Bry was the creme de la creme, whether you want to call it professional wrestling or sports entertainment. Fans recognized the bearded wonder's talent and inherent likability, and their reactions caused a course change in the run-up to the main event of WrestleMania 30, where Bryan beat Batista and Randy Orton to claim the undisputed WWE title. The Grand Slam winner's WWE career was interrupted by what were thought to be career-ending injuries, but he always overcame them and returned at the very top level. No doubt now in the autumn of his astonishing career, Danielson continues to set the pace as a member of the AEW roster. Number 35, superstar Billy Graham. He was the man of the hour, the man with the power, too sweet to be sour. What you see is what you get, but what you don't is better yet. He may have borrowed some of his rap from Muhammad Ali, but superstar Billy Graham was a true original in the world of pro wrestling. Eldridge Wayne Coleman Jr.'s first love was bodybuilding, and he did very well in that field before realizing his superhuman physique would be a good fit for wrestling. Trained by Stu Hart and breaking into the business in Stu's Stampede promotion, Graham did the territory thing, wrestling in his native Arizona as well as LA and San Francisco before joining the AWA. It was in WWF that Superstar had his greatest success as a top-level heel. His chiseled body, coupled with his overflowing charisma and eye-catching outfits, made him instantly stand out during the era. One of the first wrestlers to really emphasize the showmanship aspect ahead of the in-ring part, Graham was adept at talking the fans into the building with his captivating promos. Picked as the man to end Bruno Sammartino's 3.5-year WWF title reign, Superstar himself would only hold the belt for 296 days before dropping it to Bob Backlund. This was a turning point, as Graham believed that he could have become a babyface and held the championship for a lot longer, something Vince McMahon Sr. disagreed with. The rest of Graham's in-ring career was marred by his outside-the-ring struggles, particularly drug addiction and a myriad of health problems. However, at his peak, there were few who could touch the Superstar, a man who laid the foundation for those to come, not least Hulk Hogan. Inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2004, Billy Graham passed away in 2023 at the age of 79. Number 34, Roman Reigns. Well, it's probably about time we acknowledge our tribal chief, isn't it? A member of the Anoa'i family and wider Samoan dynasty, Joe Anoa'i retired from professional football and decided to give the pro graps game a shot instead. The son of wild Samoan Sika spent a couple of years in developmental before being called up as a member of the Shield. Whilst Ambrose and Rollins both had more experience than the big dog, it was Roman Reigns who evidently had the biggest star potential. With his look, size, and wrestling heritage, Reigns was flagged as a future WrestleMania main eventer very early on. Roman got over organically as a member of the Hounds of Justice, but when the Shield split up and received their separate pushes, the fans resisted his fast track to the top. I mean, they really resisted it. Hampered by bad booking and WWE's blind determination to make him the new smiling babyface, Reigns sucked it up and did his job to the best of his abilities. And the head of the table had ability in spades, growing into a great worker who would have been better saved with more favorable creative. Reigns hasn't looked back since turning to the dark side and has been on a record-breaking run that has cemented his status as one of WWE's biggest stars of all time. He's come a long way since suffering succotash. Number 33, Ricky Dozan. Labeled the father of Japanese professional wrestling, Ricky Dozan was a cultural icon who was by far the biggest star of his day. Born in North Korea on November 14, 1924, Mitsuhiro Momota, whose Korean name was Kim Sin-rak, left the country for Japan when he was 15 and never looked back. He first embarked on a career in sumo, which saw him rise to the sport's top division and achieve the rank of Rikishi. When his sumo career ended in 1951, Momota began training for professional wrestling. Shortly after his debut, Ricky Dozan went on an excursion to America and learned much about the psychology of the business. After his return, Ricky Dozan took advantage of Japan's increasing television viewership, becoming a TV star by beating foreign, typically American wrestlers in high-profile matches that attracted astronomical ratings. This was almost a decade after World War II, and the Japanese public yearned for a national hero. Ricky Dozan, the strong never-say-die warrior with a fierce karate chop finisher, fit the bill perfectly. He established the country's first professional wrestling organization, the Japan Pro Wrestling Alliance, in 1953 and defeated NWA International Heavyweight Champion Lou Thez on August 27, 1958. He would go on to win many more titles during his astonishing career, which sadly ended in murky circumstances following a stabbing incident in December of 1963. Ricky Dozan cemented his immeasurable legacy during his 39 years on this earth and sits in just about every professional wrestling Hall of Fame. Number 32, Harley Race. When Ric Flair is calling you the greatest of all time, chances are you're pretty damn good. A fan of wrestling from an early age, Harley Race began training for a career in the business during his teens and had his first matches when he was just 16. Far from being a boy in a man's world, Race could more than hold his own and proved his toughness by defying doctors' predictions that he may never walk again following a bad car accident that threatened to see one of his legs amputated. After returning from that ordeal, Race worked in various territories across the United States and toured Japan. Well regarded for his toughness and durability, Harley won the NWA Heavyweight title in 1973, beating Dory Funk Jr. in what was considered a huge upset at the time. In total, Race would hold the NWA Heavyweight title 8 times as he battled every major star from the era, including Terry Funk, Ric Flair, and Andre the Giant. Projecting an air of quiet menace, Race was consistently solid and could go anywhere in the world and have a great match with anyone, including untold number of one-hour draws. After helping carry the NWA for so many years, King Harley's WWF run left a little to be desired, but despite being broken down and primarily involved with comedic feuds and matches, this did nothing to hamper his legacy. After his days in the ring had come to an end, Race became an effective manager in WCW and later helped train up-and-comers while also promoting shows in his home state of Missouri. The always excellent Race passed away in 2019, aged 76. Number 31, CM Punk. A lightning rod for controversy who is not without his staunch critics, CM Punk became the star he was never supposed to become thanks, in the main, to hard work and establishing a strong connection with the audience. One of that generational crop of independent talents from the early to mid-2000s, Punk started gaining more notoriety due to his work for Ring of Honor, where he not only had great matches, hello that epic trilogy with Samoa Joe, but was also involved in some of the company's best storylines, hello the saga with Raven and the Summer of Punk. Having done all there was to do in Ring of Honor and showing up in TNA for a bit, remember that, the straight-edge superstar signed with WWE in 2005 and debuted a year later as a member of the relaunched ECW roster. Punk had his detractors who didn't believe he could be a top guy or didn't want to believe he could, but WWE fans gravitated to his refreshing character and appreciated the shift he always put in. Soon the opportunities and championships started coming his way, though it was hard for the Second City Saint to become a permanent member of the Main Eventers Club. That changed in the summer of 2011, with help from a little pipe bomb, with the second Summer of Punk and his epic WWE title victory over John Cena at Money in the Bank, making him arguably the hottest name in the industry. Punk left WWE acrimoniously in 2014, stayed away from the business for almost 10 years, and then re-emerged in AEW. For a while there, Punk was once again one of the best in the world, even if it did end in tears, and bites, and fistfights, and shoot chair shots. Supposedly a changed character, Punk improbably returned to WWE for what is surely his final run at the highest level. Number 30, Randy Orton. Pretty much bred to be a star in the wrestling business, the third generation Randy Orton had an abundance of natural talent and ability, even if he didn't always have his head on straight. A member of the vaunted OVW class of 2000, Orton may not have been as athletically gifted as Brock Lesnar or Shelton Benjamin, have as big a physique as Batista, or possess the same level of charisma as John Cena, but he may have been the best all-rounder of the group. WWE quickly pushed Randy, putting him with Triple H, Ric Flair, and Batista in Evolution. Sat under the learning tree, the Legend Killer began to make his reputation and got so good so fast that WWE were convinced to make him the youngest world champion in their history at SummerSlam 2004, beating the record set by Lesnar 2 years prior. Smooth as silk and able to adapt to any role he's put in, Orton has been WWE's Mr. Consistency for the past 20 or so years. There is a reason so many of his peers and legends of the industry cite the Viper as one of the best to do it because everything he does well, and he's managed to stay on top for the best part of 2 decades. Number 29, Antonio Inoki. One of the most influential people in the history of the wrestling business, Antonio Inoki completely changed the industry in various ways. A shot put and discus thrower in his youth, Inoki was convinced to join the Japanese Wrestling Association by Riki Dozan, coming up with Giant Baba. He founded New Japan Pro Wrestling in 1972, not only overseeing the incredible explosion of growth from the sidelines, but also inside the ring as the company's top star. The Inoki vs Gaijin formula was used to great effect, and he wrestled every big name international star of the day, including, incredibly, boxing superstar Muhammad Ali. Though their supposed contest was reported to have bored people to tears due to the lack of actual action, it did show the sort of pull Inoki had and served as something of a blueprint for mixed martial arts. When Inoki was on top of his game though, he was a force to be reckoned with, and not many could match his fighting spirit, with Inoki even enjoying an unrecognized run as WWF champion. The inaugural IWGP champion's in-ring career slowed down at the beginning of the 90s as he focused more on outside the ring ventures such as his bizarre political career. A genuine icon in his country, Inoki was involved in numerous controversies and was criticized for his later handling of New Japan's business, particularly the increased emphasis on MMA crossovers, but he retained his aura and still attracted interest with whatever he did. Inoki last wrestled in 2001, was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2010, and passed away in October of 2022, aged 79. His contributions were really immeasurable. Number 28, Ricky Steamboat. One of the very few wrestlers to have never played a heel, Ricky Steamboat was so good and so likable that Pat Patterson once remarked that he could go to the ring and cut off Hulk Hogan's arms with a chainsaw and the people would still cheer for him. The amateur standout's real name, Richard Blood, is perfect for a heel, but Ricky was given the Steamboat moniker by promoter Eddie Graham due to his resemblance to the beloved Sammy Steamboat. It was apparent even in his early days that Ricky was a measure above when it came to technique, with his arm drags in particular being of the textbook variety. Across 7 years in JCP, Steamboat dazzled with his flawless performances, but left due to creative differences and ended up working for Vince McMahon during WWF's relentless national expansion. His feud with Randy Savage is the one most fans remember, thanks in large part to their amazing blow-off at WrestleMania 3, a match still considered one of the best in WWE history. Unfortunately though, the Dragon wasn't content in the WWF and left a year after his big WrestleMania moment. He returned to the NWA and proceeded to have some of the best matches ever with old foe Ric Flair, the two men passing the NWA heavyweight title back and forth in their sensational 1989 trilogy. Steamboat would continue to be an asset before being forced to retire due to back issues in 1994. He then became a trainer and agent before launching an unlikely comeback in 2009, the same year he was rightly inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. Number 27, Jerry Lawler. It's good to be the king, especially if you're Jerry Lawler in Memphis. Trained by Jackie Fargo, Lawler debuted all the way back in 1970 and has wrestled a match every calendar year since then, an astonishing feat for anyone, let alone someone who almost passed away from a heart attack. Most of Jerry's incredible career was spent in the home of the Blues, where he won countless titles, seriously, try and count them, while predominantly wrestling as a main event level babyface. Lawler hit the mainstream in 1982 thanks to his notorious feud with song and dance man Andy Kaufman, which included an infamous appearance on the David Letterman Show. Outside of Tennessee, the King worked for various territories around the United States, including World Class and the AWA, as well as touring Japan. Regardless of what promotion he found himself in, Lawler knew how to work a crowd like few others and was a master of getting huge reactions from the smallest things. It didn't hurt that he possessed one of the best working punches in the game and could sell as though his life depended on it. Though Lawler continued to wrestle in Memphis even after his 70s and 80s heyday, he became more famous for his work in WWE as both a color commentator and occasional wrestler. His broadcast partnership with Jim Ross is considered one of the best of all time and helped maintain Jerry's connection with the fans, meaning they still really cared when he donned the singlet from time to time. If you put the misogyny and, let's be honest, overbearing creepiness to one side and focus on Lawler's strengths as a performer, it's hard to deny that he was top tier when it came to promos, selling, and storytelling, and the WWE Hall of Famer's longevity speaks to how smart of a worker he was and is. Number 26, Mick Foley. Inspired to become a professional wrestler after hitchhiking to Madison Square Garden and witnessing Jimmy Snuka's famous cage leap, Mick Foley trained under former WWF Tag Team Champion Dominic DeNucci and actually worked some early squash matches for Vince McMahon. The 80s were spent gaining experience in the territories and having a short spell in WCW, a company he returned to in the early 90s. Scarily believable at portraying a madman, Foley as Cactus Jack stunned audiences with the lengths he was willing to go to during his matches, which included taking some of the most brutal bumps ever witnessed in mainstream American pro wrestling at that time. But Foley's matches were much more than mere stunt shows, and he had compelling feuds and bouts with Sting, Vader, and others before leaving WCW and going back to the indies and international promotions. During this period, the King of the Deathmatch had a very strong run in ECW and then signed with WWF in 1996. As Mankind, Foley was thrown right into the thick of it by feuding with The Undertaker. The two would have some spellbinding matches, but their Hell in a Cell classic at King of the Ring 1998 stands to this day as one of the most iconic matches in wrestling history. Yes, Foley will live on in the highlight reel for eternity thanks to his exploits that night, but there are so many more dimensions to him, whether it's his hilarious comedy work or the critical part he played in establishing The Rock, Triple H, Randy Orton, and Edge as true main event stars, never mind those WWF title wins at the height of the Attitude Era. Selfless almost to a fault, Mrs. Foley's baby boy isn't just the hardcore legend, he is a legend full stop. Number 25, Triple H. Was Triple H really that damn good? Well, based on the evidence of a legendary 20-year career, you would have to say yes, wouldn't you? The cerebral assassin has had his naysayers, but the man has always been a student of the game, no pun intended, training with Killer Kowalski and doing the Weekend Warrior thing en route to WCW. Like a fair few who would go on to become much bigger stars elsewhere, Triple H was little more than an undercard guy looking for an opportunity that never came. I mean, terrorizing and Jean-Paul Levesque hardly screamed big time, did they? A switch to WWF proved to be the right ticket, as the Connecticut blue blood Hunter Hearst Helmsley received a sizable push. As fans, we watched Trips grow and develop as a performer as he made his way up the card. IC title and King of the Ring wins followed before he helped found D-Generation X with Shawn Michaels, and then distinguished himself as one of the top stars of the Attitude Era by changing up his look, style, and character in '99. And then, he didn't look back. The game's peak year was most likely 2000, where he could genuinely lay claim to being one of the top workers in the business. But even before and after that banner year, Paul Levesque has more often than not been reliably top tier. Politically canny and married into the McMahon family, he's enjoyed more favourable treatment than most, but the fruits of his labour are there for all to see. Number 24, Edge. With all due respect to his tag team partner Christian, a world-class worker and entrant on this here list, it was obvious from very early on in their careers that WWE had higher hopes and grander plans for Edge. Adam Copeland debuted in 1992 and spent the first 5 years of his career on the indie circuits getting in necessary reps while always looking to sign with WWF. That dream became a reality in 1997 when he inked a developmental contract and debuted a year later. His first 3 years in WWE were defined by his awesome tag team with his childhood best friend, and had it all ended there, he would be regarded as one of the best tag wrestlers ever. I mean, those TLC matches with the Hardys and Dudleys alone solidified all 6 men's legacies. After splitting from Captain Charisma, Edge started to pursue singles glory. His pursuit was interrupted by a serious neck injury, but he picked up where he left off, and thanks serendipitously to a real-life affair and on-screen partnership with Lita, the first ever Money in the Bank winner became a full-on main eventer in 2005. The red-hot rated R superstar cashed in the briefcase on John Cena to bag his first major world title, the first of many. Edge is someone who worked with all the top names and had great matches and memorable feuds with everyone he was programmed with. The WWE Hall of Famer's career was thought to be over in 2011, but Copeland was miraculously able to come back 9 years later and given the chance to bow out on his own terms. He's now finishing out his in-ring days as a member of the AEW roster. Number 23, Rey Mysterio. Qualifiers like luchador or cruiserweight don't apply when debating Rey Mysterio's position as one of the greatest ever. Rey started out in Mexico at the tender age of 14, working as colibri, which translates as hummingbird in Spanish, before proving himself worthy of taking the name and mask of his bone-bending uncle. A revolutionary high flyer, Mysterio Jr. dropped jaws in AAA, Japan, and ECW ahead of blowing minds with his WCW debut at the 1996 Great American Bash. Many of the boys in the back were laughing when the skinny kid with the fresh face walked into the locker room, but gave him a standing ovation when he returned following his match with Dean Malenko. The Cruiserweight division quickly became the highlight of WCW's programming, with Ray leading the way. Although Rey got a decent push in WCW, the question remained how he would fare in WWE, an organization that could be accused of routinely failing to effectively use smaller talent. Mysterio would face no such issues, as he was treated as special right off the bat. With his mask wisely put back on and having patented the 619 since WCW's demise, the biggest little man was unstoppable, and he has continued to make history for someone of his size and ethnicity, and is a genuine mainstream star. Still performing at the highest level, one simply must marvel at Mysterio's ability to keep going after more than 3 decades in the business. One of the industry's best ever babyfaces, there may have been other great cruiserweights or other brilliant masked wrestlers, but there is only one Rey Mysterio. Number 22, Dusty Rhodes. If ever there was a professional wrestler that personified the importance of charisma, personality, and being able to connect with an audience, it was Dusty Rhodes. The son of a plumber was originally a rule breaker, as he gained experience in Texas and Kansas in the late 60s and early 70s before becoming a major sympathetic babyface in the mid to late 70s. At a time where wrestlers with chiseled physiques and Hollywood good looks were pushed to the top, the American Dream became a massive star because of his common man appearance and relatable character. It translated far beyond the American South too, with Dusty headlining Madison Square Garden for Vince McMahon Sr. opposite then WWF champion superstar Billy Graham. Rhodes became a booker as well as a wrestler for Jim Crockett Promotions in the mid-80s, a move that dismayed those in the locker room that believed Dusty pushed himself in the top spots at the expense of other up-and-coming talent. But the box office spoke for itself, and as good as many in the locker room were, there wasn't anyone else who could deliver a promo like the iconic Hard Times one Rhodes delivered, and there weren't many more compatible opponents for a diametrically opposite character like the Nature Boy Ric Flair. Joining WWF in 1989, commentators and critics have suggested his character and polka dot outfit were done to humiliate him because Dusty was synonymous with a rival promotion. But you'll never guess what, he got it over and made his last full-time in-ring run a memorable one. He infrequently wound up the bionic elbow for WCW, ECW, indie promotions, and finally WWE once again as he entered semi-retirement, but primarily worked behind the scenes, aiding in the development of the next generation of stars. The WWE Hall of Famer passed away in 2015 at the age of 69. His legacy is continued by sons Dustin and Cody, as well as all of Dusty's kids who came from NXT. Number 21, Kenta Kobashi. A judo and rugby player in high school, Kenta Kobashi applied to and was accepted at the All Japan Pro Wrestling Dojo in 1987. Debuting on February 26, 1988, Kobashi lost his first outing, as well as the next 62 all-singles bouts. This was a booking strategy devised by All Japan booker Giant Baba to allow Kobashi to demonstrate his fire in defeat, as well as build sympathy with the audience. It more than worked, and Kobashi would battle his way up the card, establishing himself as a formidable tag team wrestler with partners Tiger Mask 2, aka Mitsuharu Misawa, Johnny Ace, and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi. In the mid-90s, Kobashi separated himself from the rest of the pack and emerged as a single star of the highest quality. A master of the King's Road style, most commonly associated with the four pillars, Kobashi, Misawa, Kawada, and Taue, he had untold number of classic matches in All Japan rings during the 90s, including several that were named Match of the Year by various outlets. The three-time Triple Crown champion followed Misawa out of the company following Baba's death in 2000 and facilitated the formation of Noah, dropping the titles in the process. Serving as Noah's in-ring MVP, Kobashi helped put the fledgling company on the map thanks to his string of exceptional main event matches, all of which he produced despite his body, particularly his knees, rapidly breaking down. What made Kobashi so great was his unequaled fighting spirit and how he gave his matches, especially his title defenses, that elusive big fight feel. Well, as how hard he smacked people with lariats and how he dumped them on their heads with spine-jarring moves like the Burning Hammer. After struggling with injuries for an age, Kobashi finally called time on his fabled career in 2013. Number 20, Brock Lesnar. Heavily recruited after winning the NCAA Division I Heavyweight Wrestling Championship at the University of Minnesota, Brock Lesnar chose WWE ahead of WCW in New Japan and never looked back. From the moment he made his main roster debut the night after WrestleMania 18, fans knew the so-called next big thing was something truly special. A year later, Lesnar had already become the then youngest WWE champion in history by beating The Rock in the main event of SummerSlam, and bagged his second title by downing Kurt Angle in the WrestleMania 19 show closer. A year later still, Brock had decided that he was tired of the pro wrestling business and quit in spectacular fashion. His attempts to make it in the NFL, a long shot at best, didn't quite work out, but after a pit stop in New Japan, the Beast Incarnate found the perfect avenue to rebuild his name, reputation, and fortune with the UFC, winning the UFC heavyweight title just a few fights into his MMA career and lighting the box office on fire. Once he was finished in the octagon, WWE were more than happy to have Brock back, 8 years after he quit. Brock's second WWE run lasted more than 5 times longer than his first, which is incredible really, but the man continued to draw money and interest and is one of the biggest stars WWE have ever had a hand in creating. With regards to the standard of his matches, that really depends on what Brock Lesnar shows up on any given day and what sort of business he wants to do. And business is the key word when it comes to Brock Lesnar. We don't know what the future holds for Brock Lesnar, but it's fair to say that when he's on song, there is simply nobody in the same stratosphere as the Beast Incarnate. Number 19, Roddy Piper. Just when you thought you knew the answers, the imitable Roddy Piper changed the questions. Born in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, no, not Scotland, Piper endured a rough childhood that saw him turn to boxing, judo, and amateur wrestling. A product of the territory system, Hot Rod made his name as a villain in the California and Portland regions and had a red-hot feud with Chavo Guerrero Sr. that helped make his name. Piper honed his skill as a heat magnet who was unafraid to ruffle feathers before moving on to Georgia and then Mid-Atlantic, where he became a fan favorite. Undeniably charismatic, Rowdy Roddy talked the people into the arena and then made sure to give them a real show once they had bought a ticket. Like in the bloody dog collar match he had with Greg Valentine at the inaugural Starrcade. After finishing up with Crockett, Piper signed with WWF in 1984 and quickly became one of the linchpins of the rock and wrestling era. His Piper's Pit interview segment became one of the most iconic in WWE history as the Rowdy Scott got over by pushing everyone's buttons, whether they belonged to his nemesis Hulk Hogan or celebrities like Cyndi Lauper and Mr. T. After a whirlwind few years, Piper first decided to hang up his bagpipes in 1987, only to return after a couple of years. He would remain a big star through runs in WWE, WCW, and WWE again, with his larger-than-life personality helping to cover for athletic decline. Piper had great matches in his career, no doubt, but when you think of him, you think of the character, the moments he made, and how he made the audience feel. Few were better at what he did, especially when it came to antagonizing others, and Piper knew how to protect himself by ensuring his character was booked strongly and rarely suffered a clean loss. The WWE Hall of Famer passed away in 2015 at the age of 61. Number 18, Chris Jericho. One of wrestling's masters of reinvention, Chris Jericho has managed to remain relevant at a high level for close to 30 years. Debuting in 1990, the lifelong fan was inspired by the likes of Ricky Steamboat, Owen Hart, and Shawn Michaels, attempting to imitate their styles and follow their career paths to WWF. A standout on the Canadian indies, Jericho gained further notice in Japan, Mexico, and for smaller US-based promotions like Smoky Mountain and ECW on his way to WCW. A former WCW television and 4-time cruiserweight champion, Jericho's WCW tenure had some highlights, but the man of 1004 holds knew, as did many of his fellow mid-carders, that opportunities further up the card were practically non-existent. His WWE career stopped and stuttered initially, but Y2J persevered and could count himself a Grand Slam winner by the time he decided to take a break in the summer of 2005. The first ever undisputed champion did some of his best ever work after returning in late 2007, in particular his gripping feud and series of matches with Shawn Michaels. Presumed by most to be a WWE lifer, Jericho ventured into the unknown by returning to New Japan in 2017, which laid the groundwork for his shock move to AEW. Having seen and done it all over the course of his career, Jericho is still performing at a high level and displaying a canny capacity to stay at the top. He's had countless great matches and been involved in as many memorable moments, but Jericho's main legacy will be his chameleonic ability to move with the times, if not stay one step ahead of the chasing pack. Number 17, Eddie Guerrero. As a member of the legendary Guerrero wrestling family, Eddie Guerrero knew he had big boots to fill if he was going to join them in the business. Son of Salvador Gory Guerrero and younger brother of Hector, Mando, and Chavo, Eddie was the baby of the family and grew up watching his older siblings from ringside. Eddie was a star in Mexico first, where he shocked fans by becoming one of the first luchadors to break from tradition and voluntarily unmask. He put a different mask back on while working for New Japan in the mid-90s as Black Tiger, which is about the same time his career south of the border also picked up, with Guerrero and his Los Gringos Locos partner Art Barr taking AAA by storm. Guerrero went solo following Barr's untimely death, going to ECW and then WCW, where, in a story seemingly as old as time, he had great matches, got over, and displayed his obvious talents before a management that never believed he could be anything more than a mid-card cruiserweight. Eddie jumped to WWF and enjoyed a decent first year there, but was released due to his spiraling personal issues. Thankfully, Latino Heat cleaned up his act and was able to return to WWE as his best self. With a renewed focus, Eddie once again showed why he was considered one of the best wrestlers of his generation, becoming a major draw, especially with a Hispanic audience. So much so, in fact, that WWE overlooked his lack of traditional headliner size and booked him to beat Brock Lesnar in a classic for the WWE title at No Way Out 2004. Tragically, Eddie would pass away less than 2 years later, at the age of 38. A superstar to the very end, he left an indelible print on the industry and is commonly cited as a key inspiration by today's generation. Number 16, Mitsuharu Misawa. A fan of pro wrestling from an early age, Mitsuharu Misawa won a national amateur high school championship in 1980 and entered the All Japan Dojo the following year. His early career followed a familiar pattern as he sought to prove himself before going on an excursion to Mexico. Upon his return, Misawa became the second Tiger Mask, and while his tenure under the hood was fruitful, his very best work came after he voluntarily unmasked himself during a match in 1990. Better suited as a heavyweight, the Emerald Warrior became the foremost proponent of the King's Road style that came to define All Japan's main events during the 90s. A 5-time Triple Crown champion, Misawa could rightly lay claim to being the best wrestler in the world for much of the decade. From his feud with mentor Jumbo Tsuruta to his cutting-edge matches with Kobashi, Kawada, and a host of others, fans knew that when Misawa was in the ring, they were going to see a fight. And that's because that's what most of his matches resembled, as he and his cohorts emphasized realism and specialized in long and grueling bouts filled with stiff strikes and dangerous suplexes. Misawa led the exodus of All Japan after Giant Barbar's death in 2000 and was the president, booker, and one of the top stars of Noah. His in-ring output in the 2000s couldn't hope to equal what he had produced in the decade before, but Misawa was still a star and proved in his GHC heavyweight title match with Kobashi in 2003 could still deliver when the occasion called for it. Sadly, Misawa's life would tragically end on June 13th, 2009 as the result of an in-ring accident. He was just 46. Number 15, Andre the Giant. Andrei Roussimoff wowed crowds in his native France and elsewhere in Europe, as well as places as far-flung as Australia and Africa, before relocating to the United States in the early 1970s. One of the most recognizable figures in sport or entertainment, Andre the Giant was a major attraction early in his career, but his fame only grew as he toured America and Japan throughout the decade. Vince McMahon Sr. understood Andre's special appeal early and helped book him around the world as a special attraction, ensuring that he didn't get overexposed and that his own promotion got a broker's fee, naturally. The eighth wonder of the world also wrestled for Vince directly, of course, and was a beloved babyface. Despite his imposing size, in his prime, Andre could really move around the ring and perform moves and sequences favored by smaller wrestlers. Charismatic and with a natural aura that's impossible to replicate, Andre the Giant was truly larger than life, and tales of his outside-the-ring escapades, in particular his almost inhuman tolerance for alcohol, are legendary. He was well compensated for his part in drawing huge crowds wherever he went, but Vince McMahon Jr. wanted the Giant to wrestle exclusively for him when he bought WWF from his old man. A key figure in the company's national expansion, Andre's WWF journey peaked right as his health was starting to badly deteriorate when he challenged Hulk Hogan for the WWF title in the main event of WrestleMania 3. Andre was still a main eventer even after the irresistible force had vanquished the immovable object, though his role lessened as his health and injury issues worsened. Continuing to wrestle for various promotions until December of 1992, Andre passed away on January 28, 1993. He was 46. The inaugural member of the WWE Hall of Fame, Andre is justly lionized at every opportunity. Number 14, The Rock. From having fans chant "Die Rocky Die" at him to becoming the most successful movie star on the planet, it has been a hell of a ride for Dwayne Johnson, the third-generation thoroughbred who conquered sports entertainment on his way to toppling Tinseltown. After a career in American football didn't quite work out, Johnson followed in the footsteps of his father Rocky Johnson and grandfather High Chief Peter Maivia and was quickly signed to a WWF deal. The smiling blue-chipper babyface shtick died a death in the early days of the Attitude Era, but the backlash to Rocky Maivia's bland persona was the catalyst for him finding his voice as the cocky youngblood of the Nation of Domination. Initially designed to get Ron Farouk Simmons over, The Rock was the nation's breakout star, and once Rock was able to demonstrate his boundless charisma and grew as an in-ring worker, there was simply no stopping him. Soon vying with Steve Austin to be WWF's top babyface, the most electrifying man in sports entertainment was cutting epic promos on and having barn-burning matches with everyone on WWF's embarrassingly rich roster during their hottest ever period. As well as 3 huge WrestleMania matches with the Texas Rattlesnake, the Great One had tremendous programs with Triple H, The Undertaker, Kurt Angle, and others. One thing that made Rock stand out was his willingness to help others in getting to another level, whether it was Rikishi, Chris Jericho, Brock Lesnar, or, Billy Gunn. Eventually, the movie industry came calling, but Rock came back to do phenomenal business with John Cena, CM Punk, and most recently, Roman Reigns and The Bloodline. A true megastar that pisses personality and has great matches with all different types of opponent. If WWE can, they should at least try to clone him. Number 13, Terry Funk. One quality that all great wrestlers must possess is the ability to make fans suspend their disbelief and buy into their act. Terry Funk had absolutely no issues in that department. Son of wrestler and promoter Dory Sr., Terry started out working for his father's Amarillo promotion in the mid-60s, with him and his brother Dory Jr. becoming big stars by the end of the decade. In 1975, the Funker won the NWA World's Heavyweight Championship by beating Jack Briscoe. He held the belt for 14 months, defending it against all manner of opponents around the world. As well as in the various NWA territories, Terry, alongside Dory Jr., became regulars for All Japan, becoming megastars in the company during their run. While Dory Jr. excelled at traditional technical wrestling, Terry was an unparalleled brawler who had fans believing that he was genuinely unhinged due to his unpredictable behavior. A year-long WWF stint in the mid-80s wasn't spectacular, but Funk did get to have a string of high-profile matches with Hulk Hogan. Funk re-established his main event credentials when he returned to WCW in 1989 and had a series of blinders with the likes of Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat. Terry was prolific in the 90s, wrestling for WCW, ECW, WWF, and various Japanese companies, as well as on the indies and overseas in Europe. And who wouldn't want to have Terry Funk on their show, you know? He was a one-of-a-kind performer who always put on a show and was more than willing to help the next generation along, mentoring would-be stars such as Mick Foley. Funk paid a serious price for his half-century of wrestling, but kept going until 2017, despite about 50 or 60 threats of retirement in the decades prior. He sadly passed away in August of 2023 at the age of 79. One of the rare breed who can do everything in wrestling well, heel, babyface, brawling, technical, comedy, serious, and so on, Terry Funk was everything good about professional wrestling and leaves an unmatched legacy in the industry. Number 12, Gorgeous George. Arguably the original sports entertainer, Gorgeous George is also perhaps the most influential professional wrestler ever. Growing up poor in rural Nebraska during the Great Depression, George Wagner turned to professional wrestling to make a living. Like most at the time, he was a clean-cut, straight-laced trunks and boots style grappler, and like most at the time, he got lost in the shuffle. In a seismic throw of the dice, George transformed himself into Gorgeous George, becoming the first proper heel in the business. Sauntering to the ring to his own theme music, donning ostentatious robes and flanked by a valet, he managed to rile audiences up before even setting foot in the ring. It would all seem very ordinary, even tame perhaps today, but Wagner was doing this in the 1940s. A true trailblazer, Gorgeous George became a genuine draw thanks to his outlandish antics and was one of the highest paid athletes in the United States at his height. Fans were especially interested in seeing him get his comeuppance, for example in the hair versus hair matches, which saw him put his trademark golden locks on the line. Regardless of his skill as a technician, and the likes of Lou Thez vouch for him, though footage of his matches remains scant, Gorgeous George deserves recognition for laying the foundations for the many who came in his wake. Cited by icons such as Bob Dylan and Muhammad Ali, Gorgeous George's influence extended beyond the business into wider pop culture. He passed away from a heart attack in 1962 at the age of only 48. Whatever theatrics you see in mainstream wrestling today, it all traces back to the sensation of the nation. Number 11, Randy Savage. One of the most recognizable wrestlers on the planet during his pomp, Randy Savage walked, talked, and acted like the star he was. Once a promising baseball player, second-generation Randy was first the main weapon in his father Angelo Poffo's outlaw ICW promotion during the late 1970s and early 80s, before the ICW disbanded and Savage wrestled for Jerry Lawler's Memphis organization, where the Macho Man feuded with the King in the day's top feud. Signing with Vince McMahon in the summer of 1985, Savage was presented as a big deal from the get-go, introduced to fans via a storyline where every top manager in the promotion was offering him their services. The ultra-intense Randy instead went with his real-life wife, Miss Elizabeth. The two contrasted perfectly, with the ranting and raving but undeniably talented and charismatic Macho Man winning the Intercontinental and then WWF titles, and having exceptional feuds and matches with Ricky Steamboat, Hulk Hogan, and others. A stickler for detail, Savage was ahead of the curve when it came to meticulously laying out matches in advance, something that irked colleagues who preferred to do things on the fly. But the proof is in the pudding, and Randy was as consistent as anyone. He also invested heavily in himself, spending thousands upon thousands on his robes, trunks, boots, and anything else to help make him stand out. Feeling as though he could still go at the highest level, Randy signed with rival WCW in 1994 and enjoyed a revival at the top of the card, helping turn round business with his heated feud with Ric Flair in 1995. Savage wasn't quite the dynamic worker he had been at his peak, but he still had some excellent matches, in particular his series with Diamond Dallas Page. In the end, age and injuries took him out of the ring and away from the spotlight, as he was content to live a life away from the business. Living in relative obscurity when he passed away in May of 2011, Savage's death nonetheless hit hard. He had been such a larger-than-life character and made so many magic moments over the course of his career that the memories came flooding back. Despite being persona non grata in WWE after leaving in '94, they really had no choice but to posthumously induct him into their Hall of Fame. Really, it felt empty without him. Number 10, The Undertaker. It's fair to say that in hands other than Mark Calloway's, one of the most successful gimmicks in wrestling history may very well have been DOA. It speaks to Calloway's ability as a performer and his grasp of the character that The Undertaker was able to have the long shelf life it did. Spells in world-class WCW and overseas for New Japan with names like Mean Mark Callis, Texas Red, and Punisher Dice Morgan hardly suggested that the near 7-footer would be one of the most enduring stars in the business. The Undertaker, however, struck a chord with fans from the moment he walked out at the 1990 Survivor Series. Over the course of the next 30 years, the dead man would win championships, have memorable feuds, and evolve significantly, all while amassing what became his calling card, the streak. Going undefeated at WrestleMania was one of the things that set the Phenom apart, with him defending his perfect record becoming at times more important than the major world title matches at the Showcase of the Immortals. A warhorse for Vince McMahon's company, The Undertaker battled through untold number of injuries and survived some shocking creative to somehow always come out of it stronger. Universally respected backstage as a locker room leader, Taker led by example and gave everything he had to the fans every night he went to the ring. Reluctant to break kayfabe and successfully maintaining his aura for 30 years, Calloway has finally been able to pull back the veil since retiring in 2020. A Hall of Famer in every aspect, few were as ever committed to their craft as the Demon of Death Valley. Truly a once-in-a-lifetime talent. Number 9, Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle wasn't a fan of professional wrestling growing up. Let's be honest, the Pittsburgh native didn't have time for it because he was too busy training to be an elite-level amateur wrestler instead. Angle's training paid off at the 1996 Olympics when he won the gold medal with a broken freaking neck, lest we forget. After initially rejecting WWF on the grounds that he couldn't lose matches, Kurt was eventually convinced by sports entertainment while watching the meteoric rise of Steve Austin. Taking to the business quicker than just about anyone could have possibly hoped for, the Olympian made his in-ring debut after just a week of training and was deemed ready for television a little over a year after taking his first bump. Angle's rookie year was exceptional as he won the European, Intercontinental, and World titles less than 12 months after his main roster bow, as well as the 2000 King of the Ring. Visibly getting better as the days, weeks, and months wore on, it wasn't too long before Kurt was considered one of the best workers in the business. His run from 2001 to 2006 is littered with exceptional matches, but Angle also mastered the entertainment aspect of professional wrestling too, displaying a ton of charisma and enviable comic timing. His WWE run came to an end due to his spiraling personal problems, which would linger for a long time, but he landed on his feet and became the franchise player of TNA. It's amazing to think, but Angle's full-time TNA run was actually longer than his full-time WWE one. Once again, it was characterized by title triumphs and great matches, even adding IWGP gold to his overflowing trophy case. How Angle managed to maintain such high standards given his often precarious physical condition is a mystery, but he can never be accused of giving less than everything he had on any given night. Retiring at WrestleMania 35, Kurt may not have gotten the big send-off his career deserved, but anyone who ever saw him in full flow will remember just how good he was. It's bloody true, you know. Number 8, Buddy Rogers. The original Nature Boy, Buddy Rogers was a sports entertainment trendsetter. A former police officer, Rogers upended his life by moving from New Jersey to Texas and completely overhauling his wrestling persona. The innovator of the figure 4 leg lock, Buddy Rogers looked, acted, and wrestled like a superstar, strutting around the ring and winding up punters on the mic, as well as his fellow wrestlers in the locker room with his boastful claims. Unfortunately for his detractors, the Nature Boy could back up what he said with his performance quality and drawing ability. Differentiating himself from others of the era, Rogers was more than happy to sell big and take whatever shortcuts it took to get the job done, from begging off and powdering out of the ring to cheating and lying to the referee. Those characteristics, along with the strutting platinum blonde hair and choice of finisher, would be aped by many, most famously Ric Flair. He was also known as being one of the very few back then who would pre-plan most of their matches in advance, referred to as sequencing at the time, a common practice today, as well as incorporating more flying and high-impact moves as opposed to mat wrestling. Rogers wrote his name in the history books, not just with an NWA title reign, but by becoming the first WWF champion in 1963. He didn't hold the gold for long before passing it to Bruno Sammartino Sammartino, but he would continue wrestling into his 60s. Passing away in 1992, Rogers was posthumously inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 1994. Number 7. John Cena. Astonishingly, WWE almost let Cena go just 6 months into his main roster tenure. How different history might have been. A lifelong fan of the business, Cena paid some dues in California-based UPW before being signed to a WWE developmental contract. Learning the ropes alongside Batista, Lesnar, Orton and company, Cena's charisma couldn't be denied, even if his ring work was a little rough around the edges. Thrown into the deep end on SmackDown as part of WWE's Ruthless Aggression shakeup, John floundered as a bland babyface before turning heel and becoming the Doctor of Thugonomics. The raps and disses and general rebelling against authority inevitably turned Cena babyface again, and he won his first WWE title at WrestleMania 21. WWE's relentless pushing of Big Match John turned a very vocal section of the fanbase against him, not helped when WWE and Cena's character in particular went decidedly PG. However, Cena weathered the storm and shouldered the pressure and basically carried WWE on his swollen shoulders for a number of years. Was it all great? No, it wasn't. But when Cena was on, he was tremendous value and a genuine megastar, and it's telling that fans have rediscovered their reverence for Cena now that he's followed his frenemy Dwayne Johnson to Hollywood and only shows up here and there. A proper big match performer, Cena can put on a show with anyone, whether you like his style or not. He can talk, he can rap, he can shift ungodly amounts of merchandise, and he can do it all with a smile on his face while putting smiles on the faces of others. For his Herculean Make-A-Wish efforts alone, Cena should be considered a top guy. And when it comes to discussing the biggest stars in the history of the business, he is right up there. Thanks to the benefit of time and context, we can now assess his career as a whole. The 16-time world champion did alright, didn't he? Number 6, Bruno Sammartino. Born in Italy, Bruno Sammartino emigrated to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania when he was a high schooler. Speaking practically no English, he was bullied at school and turned to weightlifting and amateur wrestling. The intense physical exercise bulked Bruno up, and he was recruited by a local professional wrestling promoter. Less than a month after his debut, the Italian strongman would have his very first match in Madison Square Garden, an arena he would go on to headline and sell out more than any other wrestler in history. It was in the world's most famous arena that Bruno, 27 at the time, won the WWF title, defeating Buddy Rogers in just 48 seconds. Sammartino would hold the belt for 7 years, 8 months and a day before dropping it to Ivan Koloff, a result which stunned fans into silence until they rioted. During the 1960s, Bruno had become a hero to fans, particularly those in the Northeast, where there was a large Italian-American demographic. Well and truly earning his living legend nickname, Sammartino may not have been the technician and showman that others were, but he was remarkably consistent, and his power at the box office spoke for itself. It was no great shock that Vince McMahon Sr. wanted to put the belt back on him, with Bruno's second reign lasting a not insubstantial 3 years, 4 months and 20 days. Losing it to superstar Billy Graham didn't exactly hurt his drawing power, as evidenced by Sammartino and Larry Zbyszko drawing the first $500,000 gate for their cage match scrap at Shea Stadium in 1981. Bruno wrestled his last match in 1987 and later on became an outspoken critic of the industry before mending fences with WWE and being inducted into their Hall of Fame in 2013. The consummate babyface who could brawl with the best of them, Bruno Sammartino sadly passed away on April 18, 2018 at the age of 82. A true trailblazer. There will never be another. Number 5, Hulk Hogan. The professional wrestling business has produced a few true household names. Hulk Hogan is one of them. Growing up in Florida, idolizing Dusty Rhodes and superstar Billy Graham, Terry Bollea decided to get into the business himself after baseball and rock star dreams fizzled out. Those first few years were spent getting reps in the Sunshine State, Alabama, and Memphis before Terry the Hulk Boulder moved on to the WWF, AWA, and New Japan. Wherever he went, Bollea was a star and often positioned as either the world champion or otherwise a strong contender. His turn as Thunderlips in Rocky III only bolstered his profile, and come 1984, Vince McMahon Jr. decided the big man with the blonde hair was going to be his golden goose and the face of WWF's national expansion after the AWA failed to properly cash in on his immense popularity. The Rockets well and truly strapped, Hulk Hogan became WWF champion and for the next decade or so was on top of the mountain. The Hulkster had previously relied on a lot more actual wrestling before embracing the red and yellow and perfecting an act that made him the most popular wrestler on earth and a legitimate crossover star. Indeed, his work in New Japan will come as a shock to those only familiar with his 80s and 90s output, with Hogan chosen as the man to hold the first iteration of the IWGP Heavyweight title. With charisma for days and a family-friendly actor message, Hogan became a certifiable money-making machine and headlined 7 of the first 10 WrestleManias. He left WWF in the summer of 1993 with an eye on making it as a Hollywood action star, but wound up in WCW within a year. Content to play the hits and cash those big fat turn-assigned paychecks for the first couple of years, Hulk did the unthinkable at 1996's Bash at the Beach pay-per-view, turning heel and forming the landscape-changing New World Order in the process. This turn revitalized Hogan's career and kept him on top for another few years until the inevitable collapse of WCW. His first post-WCW run in WWE showed that the power of Hulkamania still coursed through the veins of his die-hard fans, and his strong reactions forced a course correct complete with babyface turn and improbable WWE title triumph. In the 20 years since, a lot has happened in Terry Bollea's personal and professional lives, but there is no disputing just how big of a star he was in his prime. The term worker is thrown around a lot, but Hulk Hogan was genuinely one of the best in the industry, and the impact he had on it has led to him becoming, in the word tattooed across his back, immortal. Number 4, Shawn Michaels. At this stage, we've sort of run out of superlatives to describe just how good Shawn Michaels was at professional wrestling, but hey, we'll give it a shot anyway. A fan of the business from childhood, Michaels was trained by Mexican wrestler Jose Lothario and set about working for territories including the AWA, World Class, and Mid-South, as well as a cup of coffee in WWF, where he and tag partner Marty Jannetty were fired after 2 weeks. That wasn't the end of the Rockers' New York days, of course, and the duo returned a year later. They established themselves as one of the most exciting teams of the late 80s and early 90s and had great matches with everyone, but it was clear and obvious that Michaels in particular was destined to be a single star. He got the opportunity after splitting from Jannetty and transforming himself into the cocky, cocksure Heartbreak Kid. From then on, there was no way to halt the momentum of HBK, who really was one of the standout wrestlers of the 1990s. Intercontinental title glory and the countless excellent matches that came with it led to the world title as Michaels realized his boyhood dream by beating Bret Hart in an Iron Man match in the main event of WrestleMania 12. The quality of the showstoppers' performances was never in doubt while he was a headliner, and the standard he set rarely if ever dipped, but Shawn was plagued by personal demons that could cast a shadow over his work in the ring. Forced to temporarily retire after sustaining a serious back injury in 1998, Michaels got a shot at personal and professional redemption 4 years later when he became a born-again Christian and returned to WWE. What was supposed to be a one-off gradually became a second full-time run. This second run was characterized by the same amazing performances, but without the baggage Shawn carried the decade prior. You really just have to marvel at how seamlessly Michaels was able to come back and fit right in with the newer crop of talents, but one of the GOATs made it look easier than it really is. HBK has won just about every title, the Royal Rumble, headlined multiple WrestleManias, and been involved in some of the most engaging angles and storylines in WWE history. Saudi Arabia aside, the boy toy called it a day in 2010, retiring with an all-time classic, because duh, and is now helping the next generation as a key part of WWE's developmental system. I think he's cute, I know he's sexy, and I'm 100% certain he's a top 5 great in the history of the industry. Number 3, Bret Hart. The best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be. Bret Hart is not far off, let me tell you. Born into the legendary Hart wrestling family, young Bret originally wanted to be a filmmaker, but predictably found himself working for Father Stu's Stampede promotion, first as a referee and then as a wrestler after a surprise debut, filling in as a replacement. Bret gained experience in Canada, having some cracking matches with Dynamite Kid, and also toured Japan before Stampede was bought out by Vince McMahon and Bret found himself heading to New York. After initially rejecting a go-nowhere cowboy gimmick, the Hitman joined forces with Jimmy Hart and brother-in-law Jim the Anvil Neidhart to create the Hart Foundation. They became one of the most successful teams of the era, beautifully combining technical nous with raw-boned power. They claimed the WWF Tag Team titles twice and had some great matches with a wide variety of duos, but it became apparent that Bret was destined for singles stardom. The excellence of Execution's solo career kicked off properly with his Intercontinental title victory over Mr. Perfect in an absolute clinic at SummerSlam 1991. A little over a year later, Hart added the WWF title when he beat Ric Flair at a house show in Saskatoon. Very much in the right place at the right time, Bret was the beneficiary of Vince McMahon's decision to push smaller, more athletic and more natural-looking wrestlers in the wake of the steroid scandal. Not that the Hitman didn't more than hold up his end of the bargain, of course. As well as being able to have a good match with anyone, he was also immensely popular, particularly in Canada and Europe. Between 1992 and 1997, Bret was one of WWF's true stalwarts, helping carry the company during some of its darker days, and helping make the likes of Shawn Michaels and Steve Austin in the process. WWF thanked their tireless mainstay by infamously screwing him over on his last night with the company, some reward for the sacrifices he had made as pretty much a model employee for 13 years. His post-WWF run in WCW was mishandled right out of the gate, and Hart was forced to retire after an errant kick from Goldberg at Starrcade 99 resulted in debilitating post-concussion issues. It was a cruel end for somebody who took their craft, including protecting their opponents, so seriously, yet was able to have some of the most realistic-looking matches in mainstream American pro wrestling. He didn't have an OTT character, and he wasn't the most charismatic promo around, but the pink and black attack had few betters when it came to the work between the ropes. Number 2, Ric Flair. Ric Flair's unparalleled wrestling career almost came to an end just a couple of years into it, when he miraculously managed to survive a plane crash that killed a fellow passenger. In the crash's aftermath, Flair adapted his style and went from a power-based brawler to a flamboyant technician. Patterning his persona after the original Nature Boy, Buddy Rogers, Slick Rick became the man, often the 60-minute man, thanks to his capacity to wrestle hour-long draws night after night. While Flair had success during the late 1970s, he didn't win his first NWA World's Heavyweight title until he defeated Dusty Rhodes on September 17, 1981. After that, the dirtiest player in the game was solidified as the NWA's franchise player, relied upon to hold the gold and defend it around the world. A fine babyface, Flair was much better as a heel, and his peak was probably while reigning as the NWA's top villain as the frontman of the Four Horsemen. Tremendously charismatic, Flair's work on the microphone somehow managed to match the lofty standards he had set in the ring. Flair could talk them into the building and then give them a show like they'd never seen before, regardless of his opponent's style or even experience level. He was that good, and always left a territory better than he'd found it. The Nature Boy's best bouts came against the likes of Harley Race, Dusty Rhodes, Sting, Terry Funk, Randy Savage, and especially Ricky Steamboat. Synonymous with the NWA and then WCW, Flair also had two standout runs in WWE, the first in the early 90s where he won the WWF title twice, and the second in the 2000s where, though he was in the winter of his in-ring career, still proved that he could go when the occasion called for it. There is of course a strong argument that he should have hung up the robes after his WrestleMania 24 loss to Shawn Michaels, but no amount of hanging on could diminish what he had done across 4 decades. The fact is that diamonds are forever, and so is Ric Flair. Number 1, Steve Austin. If you think Steve Austin is the greatest pro wrestler ever, gimme a hell yeah. And if you don't, well, these things are all inherently subjective, and it's really just a bit of fun to celebrate some legendary performers, so what are you really gonna do, eh? Falling in love with the business at an impressionable age, all Austin wanted to be when he grew up was a pro wrestler. So he trained to be one, and then worked for the remaining territories like World Class and the USWA before joining WCW in 1991. Stunning Steve Austin was technically sound and always worked hard, but Austin found it hard to climb the ladder in Atlanta. He could give you a good match 9 times out of 10, but the gimmick didn't really suit and he seemed rudderless despite runs with the United States and TV titles. His personality shone a little brighter when paired up with Brian Pillman in the entertaining but short-lived Hollywood Blondes tag team, which was broken up prematurely for no discernible reason. Dropping the US title to Jim Duggan in 35 seconds on pay-per-view probably signaled to Austin that it was time to try his luck elsewhere, but he was fired before he could quit. A pit stop in ECW did wonders for his confidence when it came to cutting promos, but WWF curiously had Ted DiBiase do the ringmaster's talking for him when he signed with the company in late 1995. Rightly sacking that dead-end gimmick off at the first opportunity, he rebranded as Stone Cold Steve Austin, a vicious heel inspired by serial killer Richard Kuklinski, aka the Iceman. The tides were turning in the Attitude Era, and the would-be despised villain ended up being the most popular wrestler the business has ever seen. Turns out the predominantly young adult male audience got a kick out of seeing the Texas Rattlesnake defy authority and rebel against his boss while dishing out stunners and guzzling beer. Who'd have thought, eh? A blue-collar hero in black trunks and boots, Austin was over in a way that few have been before or since. In the ring, he had to modify his style due to a serious, almost career-ending neck injury suffered at SummerSlam 1997, but his matches were still spectacles, and anything with Stone Cold on it did huge business on television, on pay-per-view, and at the merchandise stand. The multi-time WWE champion came back from major neck surgery to have another tremendous run that was cut short when the bumps and miles eventually caught up to him. It's incredible to think that his main full-time run on top only lasted about 3 or 4 years. What the Hall of Famer accomplished in that time has ensured that he continues to receive and will always continue to receive a glass-shattering response whenever he resurfaces. A great worker in his day, an iconic character, and one of the biggest draws in the game, often imitated, never duplicated, there is only one Stone Cold Steve Austin, and that's the bottom line.